Hey guys, and welcome to the Wildman Revolution podcast. I'm super freaking excited today because not only do I have another wild man, but he's a young bloke who is in a specific area which is so relevant for the current revolution that is happening in the world. And we're going to go deep into many things. Anything from the Great Reset, the fourth industrial revolution, cryptocurrency, but realistically the only true decentralized one in Bitcoin. And this man is going to take you to places that I don't know if most people are ready to go. And I think that's the point of this, to give perspectives. We're going to go down some rabbit holes. Nothing is off the cards here. So disclaimer, nothing we share here is financial advice for one. This is education and entertainment purposes only. There will be some colorful language. So depends how you want to raise your kids. They can listen in and turn up the volume, or you better kick them out of the room. And there's some stuff that's going to be shared in here too that is going to have you. I invite you to be open-minded. I invite all the listeners to really just be open-minded, whatever beliefs you've got, however you see the world. We're pretty straight up, and you're gonna hear from Luke really soon. How do you pronounce your last name, man? I was meant to ask this before we record.
Yeah, it's a tricky one. You've got to pretend there's a H on the end of it. So Mikic.
Mikic, I thought so. Luke Mikic. Where's that come from, brother?
I'm actually not sure. I think it's Middle Eastern. I've been told it's Croatian or Serbian or Ukrainian, something like that. But I've been called Mikic, Mick Dickalick. I get called all of it, brother. So
well, there's the introduction we get, man. I'm asking you how you pronounce your last name. So I'm going to hand it over to you, Luke, man. And I'm fucking rapt that you're on because we've been chatting. We only connected pretty recently through a truth community. Even there's some fucking distortion in that. But I've seen what you've been doing in the world and the the intelligence you bring to the space at the same time of the not give a fuck attitude about what's going on in the world and bringing like a solution focus to what you do. So I'm going to hand the mic over to you, brother. Give us a bit of a background and introduction and what's led you to here now, especially in the last, say, 3 to 4 years.
Yeah, so thank you so much for having me on, firstly. I'm really excited to be here. I'm really excited to talk Bitcoin. I'm really excited to talk big picture, and I 100% agree. There are distortions everywhere in the world. Everywhere we look at the moment, Steve, it's a pretty crazy world out there. But why am I here? Why am I so interested in Bitcoin? Why am I so interested in smaller governments? Why am I so interested in all of these things that we see around the world is because I think, like many of your viewers would probably agree, the world's pretty fucked up right now. The world's never been more crazy than it is right now. And everybody's looking at all of these different problems, but they're not seeing the root cause of all of it. So whether it's too much government control, whether it's you work so goddamn hard, you work 50 hours a week and you just can't seem to get ahead, because the price of housing, food, rent, superannuation, insurance, the price of everything just keeps going up and up and up while your wages don't. Whether another problem is you don't like government mandated lockdowns, you don't think the government should be making you do compulsory things with your body and your bodily autonomy. Every single one of these problems that people rightly point to and say, that's a problem, I don't like it. All of the problems people point to, it's all a follow-on or a second-order consequence of the money being more broken than it has been in human history. The money right now has never been more corrupted or more broken than it has been in human history. Interest rates are at 5,000-year lows. The financial system's more corrupted than it has been in human history. And it's set up in a way that the 1% will continue to profiteer. And they essentially act like leeches and parasites on society, as long as the 99% don't understand how an inflationary monetary system works, which we're going to probably go into a lot more detail later on in the podcast. But that's why I'm here, because the financial system's set up in a way that the 99% don't understand what's going on. They go to their 9-to-5 job, they get home, They're fed this really comfortable lifestyle, switching on the TV. Oh, it's all good. The government's looking after me. Oh, I've got Netflix. I'm so comfortable. I can outsource all of my responsibility onto the government. I'm sure they're going to look after me. That was a lot of a tangent and a pretty long introduction. But the reason I'm in Bitcoin is because Bitcoin fixes all of this. It fixes the corrupted financial system. And for the first time in human history, it takes the control of money out of the hands of the government. And I think that is a potentially very revolutionary thing. So that's a bit of a loaded introduction, but we're going to go through all of this in a lot more detail, break it all down, because we're not taught about money in school for a specific reason. We're not taught about money in school so the 1% can continue to profiteer off the 99% or the productive workers in the economy. That's a long introduction.
Nah, man, and I'm glad I handed over the mic for you, for the listeners and the viewers out there. Like I say, this is what I'm rapt I've got you on as a guest early on in the show, because this is what I've loved about your passion and the in-depth, like you just roll it off. Like you're so clear on what's broken, all the different angles on it, but also you're so passionate about like, this is here for a reason. This is like this huge solution. And you're right too. And I think what's happened in the last couple of years, if we look at Bitcoin too, Bitcoin, it's like a paradigm shift, like 2009, the white paper was there. Like this is new stuff. Yeah. And look what's happened in the world since 2009. Of course, the timing was there. Now, people waking up, this great awakening, even though I think still 98% are still asleep or half asleep, but people are starting to wake up. And it's interesting how Bitcoin's evolution has happened. And then cryptocurrency, blockchain, the space, the technologies and everything like this has evolved rapidly, but Bitcoin's just done its thing. It hasn't changed in its essence, so to say. It's just doing its thing and has grown and evolved as this awakening happens across the planet. I just want to shift into you and when you started waking up, so to say, to this. Was it something like as a young age? Like I said, like I was aware that money stuff wasn't taught in school, but I just wanted to go and kick the footy around and play fucking cricket. Like that's all I wanted to do. I didn't give a fuck about the money and stuff like that. No, mum and dad are paying for school. Mum and dad are getting my lunch and da-da-da-da. And it wasn't until later in life and I had to work my ass off for it. I'm like, fuck, this is a tough gig. But where did you wake up to this stuff?
Yeah, so I think it's probably worth mentioning that you guys are probably going to find out. I'm a bit of a nerd for all of this stuff like economics and politics and, computer science, but I've never been this way. So I was just like the everyday Aussie bloke. I love sport. I used to do, athletics, footy, cricket, used to play the sport 24/7. I'd just be completely preoccupied and focus on sport and be like the everyday person. I'd just switch off. I'd go to work. I wouldn't care about any of this nerdy stuff that I'm about to probably show you guys at the moment. I didn't care about it until I found out how rigged the financial system was and how when you understand that government manipulates money, the financial system, it kind of motivates you to look into other areas of your life. So then you also start to look into the food and you realize that, oh, hang on, governments and big pharma, the government has their hand in everything from medicine, big pharma, the education system, or as I like to call it, the indoctrination system, because they just want to train a 9-to-5 factory worker. But I'm going off on a tangent again. I digress.
All relevant, man. It's all relevant.
Yeah. My background. So I grew up. I was always a bit of a shit of a kid, but I'd always try really hard at school. So that I ended up getting ducks of my school. So I was kind of like book smart kind of thing. And I got a scholarship to go to university and all of that thing. So I was kind of book smart, but I was always a bit of a shit of a kid. Like I always didn't like the fact that we'd get locked out of like the indoor part of the schools. So I used to run amok at school essentially. I come from Tasmania. I think I left home at 17. So I left home at 17. I was with $500 to my name just because I wasn't getting probably, I just had a bit of a strained relationship with my mother and dad. So yeah, I left home. I was homeless at 17. I had to move away for university. So I got that scholarship for university. So I had to move to a different city to go and study at university. So I was actually homeless for a year there when I was trying to attend university. So I guess all of that was kind of good training. It kind of trains you to always have a rainy day fund. It trained me to always have some sort of savings on me because I had to fend for myself. So I suppose I was bred a Bitcoiner. So I was at university. I was doing and I always hated government. So I always just thought we should have had more freedoms. And I always thought, I just didn't like rules. I always thought we should be free to do our own thing. So I was kind of primed to be a Bitcoiner. I was at university. I was doing a double major in maths and chemistry. And then I found Bitcoin in 2018. And at the time, I think I was working 2 jobs when I was at uni full time. So I was trying to save as much money as I could because I wanted to get onto the Australian property ladder. I believed, that's how you get ahead. You get on the property ladder as soon as you can. So I was always saving, trying to get on the property ladder. Found Bitcoin and the property ladder 2018. I thought, oh, this is really interesting. I'm going to leave uni. I'm just going to have a gap year at this stage, and I'm going to go look at Bitcoin and property. I think I can kind of be a little bit more entrepreneurial, and I might even start a business. I was undecided at the time, but I left university. And then I've kind of been on a very gradual process since 2018 of just, I couldn't figure out why the house prices continue to go up and up and up in price for the past 50 years. And I was absolutely perplexed. And so when looking into the background of the property market, it kind of led me to figure out why the house prices continue to go up and up and up. And it's because the money's broken. But we're going to get into that later. But so that's me. I've been on a very gradual process of just essentially self-studying macroeconomics, geopolitics, Bitcoin. I'm not technical at all. Didn't know what a computer was before Bitcoin, but I've been trying to learn as much as I can more about the technical aspect of Bitcoin, a little bit of computer science, just trying to learn as much as I can because I'm a dumbass. Like I'm like everyone else. I'm just your average bloke. But Bitcoin, when I got red pilled on Bitcoin, I think maybe 2019, I started to really understand it and understand the implications that it's going to have on society. When you first understand Bitcoin, us Bitcoiners always talk about it, you can't sleep for weeks. When you understand what it is and how it could potentially change the world, I couldn't sleep for weeks. I would have a couple of hours sleep and I was just up all night. I was trying to consume as much Bitcoin content as I could, like just hours of podcasts, hours of papers and articles and books, just trying to read as much as I can. So that's a little bit about my background. That turned into a bit of a long story. I digress, but
I think for everyone listening in, but because you're a young dude, like seriously, man, but already like you've come out and you've shifted into this entrepreneurial mindset, I think, which is solution focused. It's like, well, what is the solution? And Bitcoin's there, and you only got it in 2018. I bought my first Bitcoin, I think it was 2015 or 14. And I had to get a friend of a friend who knew a broker to do it. I had no fucking idea. And back then, and I learned lessons for about 3 or 4 years. I had no idea I was getting into all these auto traders and all these things, just trusting what people, this is what you do with it. I had no idea what Bitcoin was. And it was through my lessons and everything, and to see how the world started unfolding for all the other stuff I was awake to. I'm like, wait a sec, there's a lot more to this. And I remember when I probably read the white paper for the first time in 2018. And I was like, all right, I have no idea about this shit. And it put me off. Like it put me off, and I didn't of course hold my first Bitcoin. Ethereum come along, I didn't understand it. I read the white paper of that, and I'm like, they're referring to Bitcoin, but it seems way different. It doesn't make any sense. And I literally switched off from all that stuff. And it was probably not until last year where I really started to see when Bitcoin was like in the, if you want to call it the lowest point of the bear or anything like that. And I was already talking a lot about crypto, and I already knew deep down, wow, there's so much more in this, but what is it? And then the Rona hit and all that sort of stuff. I'm like, well, fucking of course. Look what's unfolding here now. And I knew about the debt system, and I knew the money system was broken, the credit system and all that sort of stuff. So I sort of started diving into all that recently too properly, only because all the other stuff was starting to match up with what I saw with government control, with like the fake wars, the false flags, shit that I've been awake to for years and years and years.
Yeah.
And here's Bitcoin. It's the only one that stood out for me. It's like, this is one, if, yeah, there's a wealth building aspect to it, holding it, accumulating, which is like what I help people do. But at the same time, it's like the monetary system. What is the new monetary system? I even heard last year, and I don't know if you've heard this, a lot of people in the Ethereum community is going, this is the new financial system. And I'm like,
Yeah.
with control, maybe, like they're full centralized, but yeah, it's awesome that you've 2018 was it. How old are you anyway, man?
So yeah, that's the thing. I'm 24 at the moment, I think.
Fucking awesome, man. Like,
yeah,
these...
I'm a spring chicken. I'm a bit of a spring chicken. So yeah, 24, and then I forgot to mention something. When did I actually truly kind of awaken? And I started to kind of come to the realization of all these false flags and all of this other crap. So that was probably maybe 2019. So I kind of understood the economic side of Bitcoin in 2018. That's when I found it. I found, oh, right, it has these 4-year halvings. It has a bull market every 4 years. And I kind of understood a little bit about the financial system. I knew it was broken. I knew a little bit that the debt was unsustainable. I knew that our money for the first time in 4,000 years was not backed by gold in every single country around the world. I kind of knew that. I knew that was unsustainable. So I thought Bitcoin's cool from that side of it, but I didn't go really down the rabbit hole till probably late 2019. And that's when I started noticing, oh, right, this whole, 9/11, that's a false flag. Oh, okay. What's the other one? MK Ultra. The US government's essentially running this whole brainwashing machine. What was the other one? Operation Mockingbird. Oh, you're telling me that the CIA and the FBI we're funding the US national TV stations back in like the 1970s and essentially running brainwashing operations on the everyday population through the TV. And this is all declassified documents. This isn't conspiracy theories. This isn't, I have my tinfoil hat for my
Awesome.
little videos.
There you go.
This isn't tinfoil hat stuff yet, ladies and gentlemen. For anyone who's just listening into the podcast, I'll whip out my tinfoil hat. This is all declassified documents that the government admits to. Yes, Operation Mockingbird's a thing. Yes, we brainwash the population. Yes, MK Ultra. This is, so I didn't understand all of this until late 2019. And I was like, oh shit, this really is like the biggest, this is a really scary thing. This is a really scary, and then you read books like 1984 from George Orwell, or you read Huxley's book, Brave New World, and then you read the Brave New World Revisited, and you kind of see really how dystopian the world could become in the digital age, where everything's digitized, there's no cash, and everything you do is could potentially be linked up to like a social credit score like they have in China. And when there's no cash, there's no getting out of it, and they've got cameras on the corner of every street. You kind of understand, oh shit, you're telling me the government's been doing this for decades. And it kind of, yeah, it's scary. But that's when I come to the awakening or the awareness of all these false flags, late 2019. That's the answer to that specific question. I didn't want to go off on a tangent.
That's all right, man. Tangents are good. Let's ground in. For those who've got the visuals, explain the background you've got on your wall there. I love it.
Oh, so I have a bunch of posters printed by a little Bitcoiner I met on Bitcoin Twitter. He has some of the best memes, so I better shout out to him. Self-banked. He will like that. But yeah, he's got some great memes. And I think when I was going down the Bitcoin rabbit hole, when you're going through that process of understanding what Bitcoin is, and like we were talking about earlier, you can't sleep for days on end because you're so captivated about what Bitcoin is going to do. I think I found all these memes when I was really going down the rabbit hole. I was like, oh gosh, I've got to print these out. Bitcoin. So that's the memes. But yeah, that's the backstory of my little posters.
No, I like it. The one right above your head, fiat's fucked.
Fiat's fucked.
It is. And so many people don't understand. We talk about money, we talk about fiat and all that. So many people don't understand money. It's something we are intentionally not taught at school. We're not. That system, like, if you were to describe, say, all right, how would I put
I
this?
love it. What is money? Start at the very basics.
What is money? Let's go to what is money. Yeah, let's do this. Yeah. What's your interpretation of what is money? Because I think that's important when you're talking about Bitcoin as a solution.
Yep, definitely. We'll definitely get to the solution. We'll definitely get to explaining how Bitcoin becomes the global reserve currency and how it's going to be worth $200 million a coin. We're going to be talking about how every dollar you put into Bitcoin today is going to 2000x in value by the end of the decade. We'll definitely get to talking all of that, guys. But first, we really do, before we talk about the solution, we need to understand the problem. And that is money. And that's why Bitcoin was created in 2009, like you rightly said earlier. It was created in 2009 as a response to the historic bailouts in the 2008 global financial crisis. We've been trying to, the cypherpunks and the cryptographers have trying to create a digital form of money since the 1990s. There was a various number of different digital monies that these people tried to create. There was hash cash, there was e-money, there was bit money. I can't think of them all, but there was 7 or 8, and all of them failed for different reasons. All sorts of different reasons. Either they were too centralized and the government shut them down, or the technology just wasn't ready. And Satoshi Nakamoto in 2009, he put all of the beautiful things together to create Bitcoin in a way that it's truly decentralized and cannot be shut down by governments. Governments cannot control Bitcoin. But I'm sure we'll get into Bitcoin in a minute. I'm going off on a tangent again. Let's start with money.
That's all relevant, man. It's all relevant.
Yeah,
What's your? There's a lot of people in the truth community, so to say, and this is where they get carried away. They go, "Oh, it's created by the CIA. It's done this."
Yeah.
There's so many of them comments. It's like, yeah, cool. I invite you to go deeper into it, research a bit more, and just not be barking stuff around.
Yeah, so I used to believe that myself. Because I'm not from a technical background. So I used to hear, obviously I'm skeptical and pretty open-minded. So when I first heard of Bitcoin, I come across some people who were saying, yeah, it's got backdoors in it. The CIA created it. And at first, at face value, coming from someone who doesn't have a technical background, I ate that up. I was like, oh shit, I'm going to stay away from it. And then you look into it a little bit more. And what completely disproves that is Bitcoin's completely open source code. So all that means for the everyday person is I can't read code myself, but I trust many people who can code, and you can read every single line of code in the Bitcoin program. Like, it's all it is. It's software. You can read every single line. There is no backdoor. There is no way that governments can stop or control Bitcoin because it's a completely decentralized computing protocol. It's the most secure computing protocol in human history. Okay, it's got $1 trillion worth of value locked into it, and it's never been hacked because it is so secure. It is so decentralized. It's like governments trying to stop what's that thing called BitTorrents, when you download the new movies online and you download them onto a computer, and the BitTorrents, they circulate those files, or they share those files, and they share those movies to all of their friends for free. And like that, the government tried to make that illegal. They tried to shut it down. They tried to put $200,000 bounties and fines on the people running those servers. But the government's found you can't shut down a decentralized computing network that operates on top of the internet. And that is exactly what Bitcoin is. All Bitcoin is, it's very similar to BitTorrent. There's just servers or computers distributed all around the world that run the Bitcoin rules, that check the Bitcoin rules, and make sure nobody is cheating the system of Bitcoin. Shutting down Bitcoin is nearly impossible because there's 200,000 nodes, or there's 200,000 computers distributed all across the world who check the Bitcoin rules. And it has a complete ledger, or it has a complete history of the Bitcoin blockchain. So every single computer or every single node around the world, the 200,000, they all have a complete transparent ledger or transparent list of all the Bitcoin transactions over the past 13 years. So I can verify myself that the Bitcoin I own, because I run a node, I can check that my Bitcoin's valid, and I can check nobody's cheating the system of Bitcoin. So that's very simply what a node is for Bitcoin, and that kind of explains what Bitcoin is. It's just a transparent financial system where everybody can verify, oh, hang on, I can see the 13 years of transactions on the Bitcoin blockchain. You're telling me there's only 21 million Bitcoins. You're telling me that nobody's creating Bitcoins out of thin air like the government does with Australian dollars. And you're telling me that nobody's cheating the rules. That's all fair in a transparent financial system. So that's what Bitcoin is. That's what the nodes are. That's why you can't shut it down. Bitcoin's open source code, so I can read every single line of code if I wish to, and I can verify that there are no backdoors in the Bitcoin code. So the CIA couldn't have created Bitcoin. The CIA and the US government actually tried to go after Bitcoin in 2013 when they tried to shut down the Silk Road. And I think they learned in 2013 it was already too distributed and too widely decentralized to actually shut down at that stage. So I would say, just while we're still on the FBI, I would say, like, these cypherpunks, Adam Back, Phil Zimmerman, the others escape my memory, Tim May. This is really bad. I should not be forgetting the cypherpunks' names. But these guys have been, these guys have been trying to create, Nick Szabo, that's another one. These guys have been trying to create digital cash or decentralized cash for decades, since the 1990s. And Bitcoin's just the final implementation of that. And Satoshi Nakamoto, that's probably a code name for a person or a group of people who come together because they wanted to remain anonymous. So I know a lot of people get put off by that. Oh, it's anonymous. It's using the same encryption algorithm that was developed by the FBI or the US government. That's the SHA-256. That's the encryption algorithm that Bitcoin uses to remain secure. And a lot of people look at that and say, oh, the government created that in the 70s or 80s. It doesn't mean the government created Bitcoin. It's just they just created SHA-256. So that's what I would say to the point about, did the FBI create Bitcoin? No, it's probably the cypherpunks.
Yeah, I think from like the way I see the way the world functions, and you mentioned the Mockingbird press and all this sort of stuff that's kept on going. In the cryptocurrency space, it is the worst. Yeah. It is so the FUD and all this sort of thing, and they go hardest on what? Bitcoin. So if they're controlling the world, the entities that are controlling the world, the governments and the big players behind that, they control the press or the media as well. And they keep going hard after Bitcoin. For anyone out there, that should be just about evidence enough that it's a threat. There's a huge threat. Why is it a threat? If we bring it back to the monetary system, the debt system that they've controlled humanity with for so long, and the fiat, well, what's this? The fiat has a cycle, yeah? They have cycles. They're never going to work, because as soon as there's a centralized entity like the Fed, who, for people out there, surely by now you understand that is the Federal Reserve has nothing to do with federal government or anything. It's like money, the monetary value of the US dollar from when it shifted from Nixon in the 70s to not gold back temporarily. We're just going to momentarily, or we're going to pause that indefinitely. There's nothing back in it. So each and every time they're just printing more money. The value of the US dollar is probably a cent now. Yeah, it's probably not even that.
I love this.
All these things have gone down. Well, here's Bitcoin placing itself. They're trying to smash it with the FUD. They're playing on human emotion. They're playing on human psychology. That should be enough for you to go, it's a threat to their systems, their structures, whatever's going to fall over anyway. And they don't have the replacement. They don't have the, whatever it is, something I learned, you'll like this. We'll probably have to talk about this off air because I don't even know if I'm allowed to talk about this, but the whole Rona stuff, the COVID stuff, the fines or everything like that, that's their new system. That's their new system. And here we go down rabbit hole to get access to your trust that was created when you were born and had a birth certificate, which is a traded security. See, a lot of people would not know this stuff. Again, I've got to be very careful how far I go with this. But that's their new way to access your trust that was created for you. But that's a new system because the debt systems failed. The fines, traffic fines, speeding fines, all this, the tax, fuck me. If people really want to go into this.
The COVID test kits too. The Australian government last year processed a document. Any any DNA collected through the COVID PCR tests, we're allowed to actually hold on to that so we can document and kind of profile every person. Sorry to jump in. I just thought that's another.
There's so many things with this that again, why this conversation and at the center of it, the solution for what's going on in the world, be it Bitcoin, is so fucking important.
Yeah.
Because when more people understand this and then they narrow their focus into this and not be like caught up in all the other stuff that's going on, all the distractions, be it just in the crypto space, but in the world, there's so many fucking distractions now. There's so many movies playing at the moment intentionally to keep your focus away from these crashes, from whatever. You focus on this solution. I think this is where more people will ground and again, if we are in the middle of a revolution from all angles, and what people need to do is understand that if they can narrow their focus into the real solution with this thing, what are people going to be fucked with at the moment if they don't have right now? If they don't have money right now, they're fucked the way the system is. Most people are fucked. Now, I'm cool because I can go hunt, I can go catch shit, I can do this stuff, but having no money, shit, how am I going to pay rent? Shit, how am I gonna put petrol in the car? So this impacts everyone. So why wouldn't people want to focus on what is this solution in this revolution, what's going down now? That's the thing. And the 98% or 99% are still not awake to this until they fucking get it taken away from them. And that's been the last 18 months.
And that day's coming. That day is coming in Nigeria right now. If you've got money in the bank, unless you show them your vaccination card, you can't get your money out of the bank account. So that is coming to every single country around the world. And that is partly the reason why I'm so passionate about Bitcoin. I go into a lot of these communities and groups who claim to be awake, or you go to these protests and you shill them Bitcoin and they just think you're some sort of crazy salesman. What do you make? Like, they don't understand Bitcoin and they don't understand money, and they don't want to go into it. They honestly, it's kind of this self-caging, I can't think of the word, I'm sorry, but people just don't want the solution. But you mentioned lots of things I want to unpack there. You touched on fiat. You touched on the fiat.
I wasn't going to go in there because there's so many different
ways
we can take it. But let's go back to fiat. Yeah, let's go back and let's talk about it.
Let's start with fiat. Let's start with fiat money. Let's start with what money is and the debt cycle. Let's start with all of that. So I'm going to dumb it down, but we've got 10,000 years of monetary history. And before we had money, we used to barter in a community. I'm a farmer, I make cows and I sell milk. I swap you my milk, Steve. You make great shoes, so I'm going to swap you my milk and shoes. So naturally, humanity created money as a tool to just simply make trading more efficient, more easy. And for money to be selected, it needs to have certain properties, okay? So it needs to be rare, it needs to be scarce, it needs to be divisible, it needs to be, I can't think of the word, but it can't be rotten or corrosive. You can't use fruit as money, for example, because it goes rotten in 2 weeks. You can't store your savings in that. So naturally, the best form of money has been metals for the past 5 to 10,000 years since we've been under this agricultural revolution, when we've actually been able to build up savings in the form of wheat or rice or grains. Since we've settled in civilizations and cities, we've needed something to store our money in. So that's money. So money has to be rare, scarce, divisible, and very portable. So the best money for the past 5,000 years has essentially been gold. We've tried lots of other forms of money like seashells, copper and silver, but gold wins out because it best satisfies all of those earlier properties we talked about. Gold's the most scarce, gold's the most durable and malleable. So essentially a long story of money compressed in the past 10,000 years of monetary history compressed. Gold has been money for the past 4,000 to 5,000 years because it is the best of all of those things. Now, the problem with gold and the problem with money and fiat money is when you can increase the money supply and you start debasing your money, governments emperors, kings, whoever could control the money supply and debase the money supply, they naturally, as governments start to debase the money, they can't stop. And it always ends in complete destruction of the civilization. The empire collapses, or everybody's familiar with the Zimbabwe hyperinflation and the German hyperinflation of the 1920s. The economy collapses and civilization collapses when you debase the money. So like we've seen hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of examples of fiat currencies collapsing. And that's the same as gold as well. Like the silver coin that was used as money in the Roman Empire, the greatest empire of all time, when they started debasing that silver coin, the silver denarius, what happened was it led to the complete collapse of the civilization, and it led to the complete collapse of the purchasing power of the silver denarius. So that's money. You need a money that can't be debased. Okay, I'm just going to pull up a chart so we can start having a look at what's happened to our money. Okay, so essentially the Australian dollar used to be backed by gold. Okay, we used to have a money that was backed by gold, but in 1971 all of that changed. Richard Nixon took us off the gold standard, and since 1971 we've been doing exactly what hundreds and hundreds of countries and civilizations have tried before. We're debasing our money, and it's going to end in hyperinflation and a complete collapse of the financial system. Because once you start debasing the money, there's no way out. Okay, so this is a little look of the British pound. You can see that they've been debasing their money for hundreds of years. This is the most successful fiat currency, and even that has lost 99.9% of its purchasing power. You mentioned earlier, our dollars lost so much value since only 1971. A Big Mac, for example, used to cost 50 or 60 cents back in the 1980s. What does it cost now, ladies and gentlemen? Does it cost $8 or $9 per Big Mac? And you're telling me that's what, 1% inflation? You've just
I use the pie as an example. Like I'm an older dude. I'm in my 40s now. Some people don't think that, but I use the example of a pie. I used to be able to buy a meat pie for 20 cents.
Yeah.
That was in the late 80s, guys.
Yeah.
20 cents. Now, for any of you who have been working a job since then, I bet your wage hasn't gone up by how many 1,000%?
Yeah, no.
Like it's no shit. Buy a pie now, you're looking at $6, $8, $10 somewhere.
It hasn't. This is a chart that I love to show people when I'm orange pilling people. Ben and Colin put this little website together. It's called What the Fuck Happened in 1971. And I love that you brought up the fact that wages aren't rising. Because if
for those that are listening, do you want to give a reference for what this is so they can maybe see some?
Yeah, so this website's called What the Fuck Happened in 1971, and I'll definitely walk through it for the people only tuning in by audio. But we're essentially showing lots of charts, and it shows since 1971, since every country around the world depegged their money from gold, we're showing that the economy has been growing, but wages have not been. And for the previous hundreds and hundreds of years when we operated under a gold standard, prices would rise naturally, okay? Prices would rise, the economy would grow, but our wages would actually keep up to the pace of inflation, okay? And what's happened since 1971 is I'm just showing lots of charts of the real productive economy growing and the price of everything going up. Meanwhile, the everyday person's wages has not been keeping up with the price of inflation, or the compensation they should be receiving. Okay, now this kind of financial system, it's all been driven by the fact that governments have no check on their ability to print money out of thin air anymore. So that's what gold used to do. Okay, gold's very rare in the earth, and gold, you can't increase the money supply of gold. So that's why it's been a good store of value. There's an old saying, an ounce of gold used to buy me a fine man's suits for hundreds of thousands of years, or hundreds of years, thousands of years. And a 1 gold ounce will always be able to buy you a fine man's suit. And today, it's still that saying still rings on. Like an ounce of gold is $2,000. You can buy a really nice fine man's suit for $2,000. That's because nobody can increase the money supply of gold. But what governments have done since 1971, since we de-pegged our money from gold, governments have gone on an absolute debt binge, okay? They have created more money, okay, in the past year than they have in hundreds of years. I'm going to pull up some more charts for the people listening in, but I'm just showing the fact that the money supply, okay? I'm looking at a chart here, and since the year 2000, the money supply has grown from $2 trillion to over $28 trillion. Now, that's the base money supply. I'm going to pull up another chart that measures the global M2 money supply. So this isn't just the US. This is a global phenomena. This is the US, the UK, the euro, the Australian dollar. We're all printing money out of the wazoo, and this always ends in collapse. Once you start debasing your money and you start creating more debt than you can pay back, it always ends in financial ruin, which we'll go into shortly. But here's just another chart for the people listening at home. Since the year 2000, we've increased the money supply from 20 trillion to over 90 trillion. So that's up 300% odd. So what they've been doing is they've been artificially stimulating the economy, and they've been creating these asset bubbles, which has been wildly distorting the prices of things. And this is why your wages aren't keeping up with it.
Go bring that one back up. What could I have bought in 1973? See, I was born in the 70s and I don't remember it, but where's that last one? No, the one, the newspaper clipping.
Oh, yep. Yeah, the newspaper. So this is the price of stuff in Australia. So
a number 5 chicken for $1.09. Fuck.
Yeah. What is it now? $8-10 a pop?
10-11 bucks. That's 1,000%.
Yeah, that is. And like a massive 2 to 3 liter of orange juice for 79 cents. One of those bad boys set you back about $3 now.
For all you fatties out there, a Sara Lee cake was only what? 89 cents as well?
Yeah, so this is all the consequence. Wow. This exorbitant inflation is all the consequence of governments having the ability to increase the money supply and increase the debt in the system to create these massive asset bubbles. Now, this drives inequality. So this is
one thing. Let me because you're in the zone. I'm not going to mess with your flow, but see, a lot of things with what the numbers are put out, and we've seen this a lot with the Rona cases and all that. All of it's fucking bullshit, and no different with inflation. Like, you'll notice that the governments will announce inflation numbers are stayed steady or they're not ever. All you got to do is go back to it and question, all right, cool, has my income increased in the last 5 years? Oh, it might have by 1%. Okay, cool. The price of there you go, a chicken, has that grown or a pie or something, has that grown in the last 5 years? Oh yeah, fuck yeah, it's like nearly double. Oh, but the government says inflation's 3 or 4%. Like, do the maths. It's like fucking bullshit. It's not even close.
I love that you brought that up, because I always go deep into inflation and government inflation. So the government right now is claiming inflation's only 5 to 6%. Now, what they don't tell you about how they measure the CPI inflation basket is they systematically remove items out of that basket that go up and up in price. Okay, so they did this in the late 1990s, and they also did this on multiple occasions in the 1970s. So what they would do is, if the price of beef is rising at 10 to 15 or 20% a year, governments would just say, okay, let's remove beef out of the CPI inflation basket. So let's remove that. Oh, look at that. Inflation isn't 10 or 15%. It's actually more like 2 to 3%. And they do this to justify printing money and creating a debt bubble, which enriches themselves. So this is another chart of inflation, which is what Steve was talking about in a moment. And for the people tuning in at home on the podcast, it just shows that since the 1990s, when the government really started manipulating the CPI inflation basket, you can see there's these two differences in the ways inflation's being measured. There's the red. So this is the way that the government measures inflation. And since the 1990s, the way the government measures inflation with their manipulated basket, it showed that inflation's only been 2 to 3%. So governments are like, oh, look, there's no inflation. We need to stimulate the economy. We can print more money and we can drive up these massive asset bubbles. But what they don't tell you, this chart comes from a website called Shadow Stats. Highly recommend everybody goes and checks it out, because it simply measures the way that governments used to measure inflation. So that's the one in blue for the people tuning in at home or watching the video. But that has shown during the past 30 years, when governments have claimed inflation's only 2 to 3%, actual real inflation is much more like 10 to 15%. Okay. And that's, we've kind of been these frogs in the boiling water for a long time. You can kind of turn a blind eye to 5% inflation a year or 6 to 7% inflation a year. But once it starts getting above 10 to 15%, that's when the everyday person starts switching on and saying, hang on a minute, the house prices in Australia have gone absolutely bananas. What house prices aren't rising at 10 to 15%? What's going on? Why aren't my wages keeping up? Okay, I have a few charts pulled up here for the people at home. I'm just showing since 1971, I've got property prices in Sydney. Okay, the long-term average of property prices. Generally, I'm looking at something called annual wages to price ratio. So normally an average size home should cost somewhere between 2 to 3 times your annual salary. So if you're earning 50K a year, the average house price is around 3 times that. So if you're earning 50K, the average price of a home should be somewhere around 150. Obviously, this varies from city to city, but that's basically what the long-term historical average has been. And you can see since 1971, these ratios have gone absolutely bananas because governments have been printing money out of thin air. They've been buying mortgage-backed securities and artificially propping up the stock market and the housing market. Right now in Sydney, it currently costs you 12.2 times your annual income to buy an average size home in Sydney. So if you're earning like, I don't know, $50,000 to $70,000, that's why the house prices are $1 million a pop. And it's the same thing in Melbourne. You can see all of these ratios absolutely skyrocket since the early 1970s. Okay. Melbourne costs you 9.2 times your annual income for an average size home in Melbourne. The average house price in Sydney back in 1973 was $19,000 for an average size home in Sydney. And we've got Melbourne. This is again $13,000 for an average house in Melbourne, Australia in the 1970s. Let's fast forward 50 years later. The average home for somebody in Sydney is now over 1.1 million, and the average home for somebody in Melbourne's 875,000. So those have actually grown at over 9% per annum. Meanwhile, the government says, oh no, if your wages grow by 1%, that's fine. House prices aren't going up by 9 or 10% because we manipulate the way we measure it in the CPI inflation basket. That's a bit of a long tangent. I don't want to keep going.
I think it's important to understand for people too, Bart, is that this is a complicated space to understand. Like you've dived so deep from so many different angles, and all these have impacts on the way we get to function in life. And it all gets how we view money. And that's why I invite listeners and people watching. It's like, just have a little bit of an experiment with yourself. Take note of when you listen to this. Okay, I'm going to take note of what I pay for certain things. I'm going to take note of what I pay for certain things in the shop, certain services or something like that. Revisit it in 12 months' time. Like seriously, okay, cool. I'm going to look at my income now. How much does my wage rise in 12 months? It's probably going to stay the same. It's probably not going to do it. I'll probably work more hours or something like that. Yeah. And these are longer term things, but you can look into this easily right now. You don't have to be as switched on as what Luke is here to do this. You don't have to go down these rabbit holes to understand that something's off, and it has been for such a long time. That's why this is all going to fall over. I believe it's already fallen over behind the scenes. Yeah. I already believe it. And I believe what we're seeing at the moment is just band-aids from the governments and the fake news and all this to band-aid before before the bubbles pop on property, before gold price goes down or whatever it is, before banks bail themselves out with your own money that's fucking in their bank, you're not getting paid to have in there, whatever it's going to be. And before then, for people, it's going to be too fucking late.
Yeah. No, it will be. We'll definitely get into the long-term debt cycle and how I think it all falls over shortly. But I'm a little bit of a nerd, but anybody can pull up this website, What the Fuck Happened in 1971, and they can see that their wages have not kept up with the price of inflation. You can see that for the past 400 years, when we've been on a gold standard, the inflation or the cost of living. So put simply, inflation just kind of measures the cost of everything. So that's housing, food, rent, insurance, healthcare, all of that stuff. You can see for 400 years when we're on a gold standard and governments could not manipulate the money supply, the cost of things pretty much remained pretty stable, didn't really change. Every single time there was a little war and governments had to print a little bit of money or debase their gold a little bit to pay for the war, you see a little spike in prices short term, but it always reverts back to normal. And you can see since 1913, when the first central bank in the United States, the Fed, was initiated, you can see that the price of things has just gone absolutely bananas. That ain't 2 to 3% inflation. So for anybody tuning in at home, just listening to this one, I'd recommend you to pull up all these charts on the website. What the fuck happened in 1971? You don't need to read a thing. It's just an array of really good charts that shows what the fuck happened to our money. And let's get into a little bit the debt cycle, because once you start debasing the money and you start creating all of this debt that the world currently has, it only ends in two ways, okay? So this gets into the long-term debt cycle. Either governments say, yeah, you know what? We're too indebted. We've created too much debt. We're going to let it all collapse and we're going to let it all flush out of the economy, and you end up in an economic depression. So that is alternative number one to get out of a long-term debt cycle when you've accumulated too much debt. Alternative number two is if you print money out of thin air and debase the currency, you can nominally decrease the debt load. Okay, so this is what happened in the 1930s. The long-term debt cycle is an 80 to 100-year debt cycle. And right now, we're actually living at the very end of this current debt cycle. So I'm going to pull up some charts that focuses on this one a little bit more. But in the 1930s, when after the massive stock market crash of 1929, it plunged the people in the economy into a 10-year depression. So that's kind of what looks like if you let the debt collapse. It's generally very bad for the everyday person. Unemployment levels are up around, 30 to 40%. You have to ration food. Inflation's going crazy. So for anyone at home, I've just pulled up a chart of the long-term debt cycle, and you can see every 5 to 7 years, you have what's called a short-term business cycle. Everybody's aware of these. Every 7 years, you get a recession. So our previous recession was actually in the 2008 global financial crisis. Everybody can kind of remember that. And the short-term business cycles are generally pretty bad. But these kind of build up and build up and build up over 80 to 100 years until you reach what's called a debt ceiling, okay? And these debt ceilings generally come every, 70 to 80 years, okay? That's the long-term debt cycle. And when you reach a ceiling where you can't increase debt anymore, you need a massive deleveraging, okay? So this is a thesis popularized by Ray Dalio. He's one of the most famous macroeconomic investors of the past 20 or 30 years. His book's called Big Debt Crises. There's also a 30-minute video on YouTube where he walks you through all of this. I'll pull it up while I'm talking. It's called How the Economic Machine Works. Okay, so I highly recommend everybody go and check out this video by Ray Dalio because it explains the 80-year long-term debt cycle. So that's the long-term debt cycle. So right now we have reached the end of the long-term debt cycle. Okay, so globally around the world, we have never, ever had debt levels this high before in human history. Our debt to GDP ratio globally is something like 350%. Okay, total amount of debt in the world is over $300 trillion. It is mathematically impossible to pay back the debt, and governments don't look like they're going to let the debt collapse. If they were going to let it collapse, in 2008 global financial crisis, when the stock markets crashed 50% and the housing market crashed by 50%, all of the excess malinvested capital wasn't allowed to clear from the system. So the government stepped in 2009 and they bailed out the banks. they artificially devalued the currency and they printed $700 billion to bail out the banks. The banks went bankrupt and the big central bank stepped in and said, you know what, we're going to create $700 billion out of thin air and we're just going to give it to you. So, you know, it's really bad that you didn't save for a rainy day and that you're bankrupt, but we're just going to bail you out. We're going to change the economic rules. And you know what? All of the people who lost their home in the 2008 housing market crash, you didn't save for a rainy day. You didn't prepare for the fact that the housing market might crash by 50%. But you know what? We're not going to give you a bailout. You don't get any of that $700 billion freshly printed money. We're just going to give all the money to the rich. So that's how kind of our economic system's corrupted. So that's a little bit of an introduction to it.
I think they made a good point there too with the contrast, the big banks. And there's just one big bank in the world and there's two that are pitted against each other and they basically run the rest of the banks and so on and so forth. They got bailed out and the government's like, nah, screw you guys that work hard for your money. You pay your taxes, you do all this in their system. You guys have got to struggle because it's your fault that you didn't save for a rainy day. Yeah. And the thing that fascinates me with human psychology, even in the last few years, that people are so caught up in the mind control of this, they get fed this stuff and they're like, okay, that makes sense. But when you really sit with this, you really go into it and you understand that these powers that think they be do not give a fuck about us except to feed off us, except to keep them fucking in their power and so on and so forth. You go there, you're going to see how many different ways they keep us under their control. That in 2008, I think that was a big awakening for me. I was working in the mines then. And I'm like, that was the sussest shit ever. I was just like, what? Huh?
Yeah.
And I was like, I was already questioning life and shit by then. But I was like, that was so dodgy. Even like I say, I think I was the government stuff. I was probably the 90s. I was awake to shit. Like so much of it was like, that doesn't seem right. All right, what's a false flag? Oh, wow, okay. Even in Australia, Port Arthur, shit like that. I was always questioning stuff like that. Never really dived into it, but the monetary stuff, when that happened in 2008, and I was seeing houses pop in the US for $1. You could buy a house for $1. Yeah. Like, I'm like, what? But people just gobbled it up. And a couple of years later, it's like it never fucking happened, or they didn't understand it. And I think 2008, what happened there too, it's like what we're living through now. 2008 was like, not really the beginning of it, but it was that's when this happened. Like,
yeah. So the 2008 is just the beginning of the long-term debt cycle unwinding. So the long-term debt cycle unwinds in two really distinct phases. So this comes from an article put together by Lynn Alden. She's an economist, she's a Bitcoiner, and she's written an article that goes into depth on this in much more detail. So I highly recommend checking that out. But the long-term debt cycle starts with a banking crisis. So that was 2008. And back in the conclusion of the previous long-term debt cycle in the 1940s, we saw a very similar thing. The long-term debt cycle is always triggered by a banking crisis. But 2008 didn't fix things. The debt wasn't allowed to clear. Government stepped in and they said, you know what? Instead of alternative number one and let the debt collapse and let capitalism actually work and let the bankrupt people go bankrupt, we're going to create this phony economy and we're just going to print money out of thin air and bail everyone out. So we actually haven't let the debt clear. We've only increased the size of the debt since 2008, and we're putting off the actual collapse of the financial system. Okay, so we're merely kicking the can down the road. The debt hasn't cleared, hasn't concluded, and we're yet to see that. Governments have chosen to artificially print money and devalue the debt. Okay, so if you increase the money supply by 2 to 3x, or you just double the amount of money in circulation, and while the debt stays the same, yes, you've decreased the percentage. Okay, you've decreased the debt to GDP ratio by just simply devaluing the money, but you haven't actually let any of that debt collapse. So they did this in the 1940s, and that's what they're doing at the moment. They're just printing the money, but what they needed was the excuse to print the money. Because in 2008, when they did the bailouts, I've pulled up some pictures here of the massive rallies and protests called Occupy Wall Street after the 2008 massive bailout. The everyday person was pissed. The 99% of people were pissed. They understood that the rules in the game for them were different as compared to the elites. So that caused massive protests. And obviously governments were able to kick the can, print $700 billion, and the economy's kind of been on life support since 2008, never actually recovered. Okay, the debt's still massive. And we're just waiting for the next recession before the big collapse comes. And that started coming in 2019 or 2020. So for everyone at home, I've actually pulled out some charts from late 2019. Now, this is stuff that was happening in the financial system well before anybody even uttered the words lockdown or uttered the words coronavirus. For the first time, okay, there's an indicator called the yield curve inversion. Now, every single time the yield curve has inverted over the past 100 years, it has predicted a recession in the following 6 to 12 months. So for anyone listening in at home, I've just pulled up a chart and it's highlighted this. It's highlighted over the past 100 years, every single time the yield curve has inverted, you've had a recession in the following 6 months. So this inverted in 2019. So in 2019, the economic system was saying, hey, next recession's coming. And we knew we were at the end of a long-term debt cycle. So we knew the next recession was going to be a really big one. And governments were going to have to print a lot of money. They were going to have to print more money than they printed in the 2008 crisis. Because as the debt gets larger, you need to print an exponential more amount of money to devalue that money or devalue that debt. So we all knew in 2019 shit was about to hit the fan. In late 2019, the repo market started blowing up. So for anyone listening at home, I've put up a chart of the repo market. And for the first time in 10 years, since the 2008 global financial crisis, interest rates started spiking. And so that was another indicator that the plumbing in the financial system was broken. The central bank in America and worldwide, they had to step in and start they were printing hundreds of billions of dollars in September of 2019 before anybody uttered the words coronavirus or lockdown or any of that crap. So I think it's pretty clear that what we're seeing around the world is merely distractions. It's all a scapegoat and it's all a massive controlled demolition to blame the collapse of this financial system on so that they can usher in their new idea of the central of their financial system that they want to implement on the other side of that. That's why you're seeing governments around the world racing to get sorted their central bank digital currency. So do you want to jump in and say something there? Or do you want me to jump in?
Yeah. I think with the distractions and the deflections and all this sort of thing, there are so many different angles they take on this, and people are looking at. I feel because the word was coming through. When do we get their stimulus that fucking Kevin Rudd was saying go buy plasma TVs? Yep. How often does that happen? Here's a stimulus to stimulate the economy. We're going to give you a free handout of invisible money that doesn't make any difference. It's the distractions like that people go, oh, maybe the government's not so bad.
Let me jump in there. Because I love the fact you brought up the stimulus checks. Especially in Australia, if you've had your business or your job shut down, you get these little handouts, and it's a complete distraction, so the everyday person doesn't realize what's going on. So I actually ran some numbers. I did some math on this. Yeah, I can't help myself. I ran some math on the stimulus checks and the bailouts in America of this year of 2020. So after government shut down the economy and locked the entire economy down, locked everybody in their home, took away their small business and took away their jobs, deeming them unessential. They said, oh, but don't worry, out of this $6 trillion we're going to print, we're going to give you a $1,200 stimmy check. And naturally, so in 2008, this didn't happen. They didn't get the stimmy checked. So they had their pitchforks out in Occupy Wall Street and they wanted to burn Wall Street down. They knew that they got fucked in the ass. But in 2020, they've tried to hide this a little bit. They said, oh no, we're going to print this $6 trillion, but we're going to give you a $1,200 stimmy check. So I ran some maths. If you take the $6 trillion stimulus check, that's how much they increased the money supply in early 2020. You divide that by the 330 million Americans, you do the math, and every single person in America should have received $18,000 per head. If that money that if that money that got printed and artificially created was evenly distributed, everybody should have got $18,000, but the everyday person got a $1,200 check. So where did the other $16,500 go for the everyday person? I'll tell you where it went. It went to Wall Street. It went to the bankrupt corporations. It went to the central banks. It went to the bankrupt governments around the world who can't fund themselves. There's $200 trillion of unfunded liabilities in America, and that's where all that printed money's going to try to save face. So I just had to jump in there and
no, yeah, and it's so important to understand, but it's so. Again, it ties into, there's a lot of people who think they're awake out there, but I can guarantee that they will gobble up a stimulus check and they probably forget about the shit. That's the purpose of these things, is like, there you go. Hey, we're not so bad. I've had like, I've had family members and everything go to me when the government's given handouts in the last year or two. It's like, oh, how come you go so hard against the government? I said, I don't go hard against them. I said, but I know what they're doing. They're easily manipulating people like you. And just because you got $600 or whatever it is, and you go, oh, they're not so bad. Yeah. You've just been played.
Yes.
You've just been played. And then they can sneak more shit in.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just like the deflections that happen in Parliament here, even though the whole, I don't even want to go into the political system's corrupt and all that sort of shit, but it's the same thing. It's like, look over here, here's a hey, shiny object.
Yeah.
Here you go. We're going to give this to you because we have a big heart. We care about you so much. We know you've been down and out. We know you're struggling. Yep. Here's $1,200.
So we're just talking about the stimulus checks. The government just gave everybody a $1,200 stimmy check in America to completely disregard what was going on in the financial system. And most people did. They said, okay, I got a $1,200 stimmy check. Government's okay. Government's not too bad. Yeah, it's just a lockdown. It's just a vaccine. It's just my second vaccine. Oh, you're telling me it's a booster. It's a fourth booster. It's a fifth booster. Yeah, I'll take it. It's not that bad. Government gave me a $1,200 stimmy check, so I'm going to trust them. And it's all problem, reaction, solution. It's just another distraction to distract them from what's really going on. And that's the conclusion of the long-term debt cycle. Long-term debt cycle is about to conclude, and we need a new financial system. And there's everybody can agree money is going to go digital into the future. Like if we look back 20 years ago, nobody would have said, oh yeah, you're telling me we've got email on our phone, we've got the internet, we're Zoom calling each other. If you had said that to someone in 2000 and said, we're going to be Zoom calling each other on the internet, they would have been like, you're fucking crazy. But if we look forward 20 years, I'm pretty sure everybody can agree that money's probably going to be digital. There's probably not going to be cash. Governments have been trying to ban cash for the past 10 to 15 years because they can't track it, they can't tax it, they don't know who you're spending the money to. So money's going to be digital, and I think it's going to go two ways. So governments around the world are racing to get a central bank digital currency out. So that's currently the financial system or the money that's being trialed in China at the moment. So in China, you have a social credit score and there's not much cash, and the government tracks everything you do. If you make a transaction they don't like, you get a bad credit score. If you say something about the government that the CCP doesn't like, you and your family, your entire bank account can just be frozen at the flick of a switch. So that's what a central bank digital currency is. And they're actually experimenting with all these really interesting things with these central bank digital currencies. They can put expirations on the money if they want to try and artificially stimulate the economy to help with the massive debt burden. They can say, oh, Steve, you've got $10,000 in your bank account. We can see that you've been a really frugal saver, but we'd prefer if you got out there and spent your money. We want you to get out there and consume. We want you to add to the debt burden. So we're going to say that your money expires in the next 2 months. And they can actually they've been trialing this in China. The central bank digital currency, little tokens, the digital yuan has expiration rates. So that's what a central bank digital currency is going to look like. And you've even got the International Monetary Fund come out last year. So notice this is the International Monetary Fund. This isn't just China. This is the IMF saying that everybody's social credit score is going to be based upon their Google search history. So this is going to be the plan for the Western world. This is everyone. This is Australia. This is the United States, the European. This is going to go global. This is their vision of where they want to pivot and take the next financial system. It is going to essentially look like a massive digital panopticon, something out of 1984 or Brave New World. This is what they want. And if you want, again, this isn't tinfoil hat stuff, ladies and gentlemen. Well, I haven't got the tinfoil hat on. I'm reading documents off the World Economic Forum's website. They're telling you that a great reset is coming. They're telling you that coronavirus has given us a perfect opportunity to reset the financial system. Okay, this is literally what they want. And if you go and read some of the documents on the World Economic Forum, okay, they're literally, if you read some of their 2040 stuff, their vision for 2040, it's going to actually give you chills. Okay, they're literally telling you that you're not going to be able to consume energy, you're not going to be able to spend your money. The World Economic Forum is actually like straight up telling you in a recent video that they did, they actually made some predictions for the year 2030. And there was a little bit of outrage and outcry about this video because they directly said that you're going to own nothing and you're going to be happy. So I'd highly recommend everybody go and check out that video. For anybody tuning in by video, I've just brought up a picture of that. It's essentially this propaganda video. So that's their idea of the financial system. You will own nothing. You will be happy. Everything you'll need, you will rent because the central banks will own it all because they're printing the money and they're going to buy up everything. And then on the flip side of that, you have Bitcoin. So these guys obviously...
Before you go into Bitcoin, I just want to chat and just drop something in there for everyone to understand who might be just sort of waking up or new to this sort of thing and why this is important and everything. Now, these guys have got this big evil agenda, so to say. They're literally what they have to do in a free will universe, but they literally have to get our consent to do these things. Now, the way they get our consent, they've got to tell us what they're doing. Now, yes, they do it a bit sneakily in movies and all this sort of stuff. A lot of the movies out there are actually not made up. They're not fiction, they're fact. These sorts of things is how they do it. But the World Economic Forum, all these things that they announce this stuff, they tell us years in advance, this is our plan, this is our vision. By us not doing anything about it is giving consent in their eyes. Because there's no one up there going, oh, you didn't do this right, you didn't give consent. No, by us not doing anything about this stuff, we're giving consent. And a lot of people right now, they're the vaccine debate and all this sort of stuff. I'm pro-choice. I couldn't give a fuck if people want to merge with some fucking unknown thing and all that sort of stuff, and they want to be an experiment. That's everyone's free will choice. You take this to another level, these nefarious characters, organizations, all this around the world, if you don't tune into this stuff now, you're just going to do what they're telling you you're going to do. And to take it, you'll own nothing and be happy in 2030. If people actually understood the whole birth certificate thing, if they actually understood, there's something I read in Victoria, there was, without going off on too much of a tangent myself, the first home buyers grant is so big in law in Victoria now, that first home buyers grant. So this might be some of you out there. You might have been like, oh, that's so awesome. I got 50K or whatever. That's my deposit. The government now owns equity in your house.
Yep.
That's the step-by-step that it's there. It's in law. Most people won't read their banking contract. Like I say, it goes deeper than that with the birth certificate and the dead entity and the straw man or all these sort of things. But these guys have been telling us all along, they're doing this stuff. This is what we're doing. It just comes in increments.
Oh, yeah. I love that you brought the part about informed consent up, because this is going to be a little quick rabbit hole. But just quickly, while we're on the first home buyers grant, yeah. So Australia is the only country to do first home buyer grants. That's because we've got the largest housing bubble of all time. So the $50,000, it's two birds with one stone. As you mentioned, it gets the government equity in your property, so they can easily boot you out when you don't go and get your 15th booster shot later this year. And it does two things. It also keeps the debt bubble propped up. So it kind of helps with the long-term debt cycle. It gets everybody onto the debt slavery system and onto the rat wheel. But I love that you brought up the informed consent. They literally do tell you everything they're going to do. Just earlier in the podcast, we were talking about the economic system melting down in late 2019. September 2019, all of this was happening. The repo market blew up September of 2019. The Fed was printing hundreds of billions of dollars September of 2019. The yield curve inverted in mid-2019, forecasting a recession was imminent. And I love that you brought up the part about informed consent, because the World Economic Forum in October of 2019, they held this simulation, they call it, and they say, what could happen to the world in the coming years? We think the biggest threat, if we don't know what's going to happen.
We're going to role play it.
Yeah. Role play.
A fucking business meeting.
Yeah. I'm going to get shot in the back of the head for this. But in October of 2019, they held a simulation called Event 201. And they very accurately and very nicely, for hours and hours of video for anybody listening to this one, they simulated what would happen to the financial system, what would happen with the lockdowns, how we would have to control the narrative, what would happen in politics. There'd be lots of conspiracy theories rolling around in this global coronavirus outbreak. And all of the videos, I highly recommend everybody to go and check it out, because it's a carbon copy of what was rolled out in 2020. It was, coronavirus. They use all the same charts that we see on the television, the brainwashing machine, but they tell you and they forecast everything that's going to happen. So in October 2019, they held Event 201. They got all the global leaders together and said, what would happen to the financial system if a coronavirus outbreak were to spread? Okay, so they always tell you what's happening. And obviously 3 months after Event 201, we got a global coronavirus.
I didn't think it'd come out so fast, hey? I thought this is like years in advance, and it's something to take note of for the listeners out there. And I'm big on this. It's because I feel they were desperate with what's going on right now. And this definitely ties into the Bitcoin conversation as well, because they've pushed this along so fast. Now, anyone who's listening or watching, please check out them videos, especially if you've just woken up in the last couple of years, because it will blow your fucking mind. Yeah. I was aware of this shit, like Operation Lockstep. So going back to 2010 or 11 or something like that, that's all that's playing out right now. You'll hear them put this in there, like good old Biden, whatever the alien under that robot is on there. And he's like, we're in lockstep. Like all this shit, it's been a plan for so long. They've had to tell us all these things for so long. And it's just catching up now, but it's been rushed out. It is being rushed out.
It is being rushed out for a couple of different reasons. One, I think the spread and the adoption of Bitcoin, it's starting to get mainstream. And two, protests were on the rise globally in 2019. 2019 was the largest uptick of protests that we've ever seen for a long, long time. I'm just pulling it up here. This is from a recent article that by the time this video comes out, I would have published this article, but I've been having a look at this. And this source that I'm referencing, they had a look at 125 countries in 2019 and predicted that 80% of them, you would see a sharp uptick in protests and uprisings. And this is completely natural. Everybody can remember the yellow vest protests in 2019. So this is well before Corona. You can remember the massive protests in Hong Kong. I think out of these 120 countries, there was 9 countries that had over 1 million citizens or 1 million protesters in that country demanding change from the governments in 2019. So a lockdown is nearly a perfect excuse to ban protests or ban government dissent, ban free speech. A global lockdown's beautiful. This kind of ties into another book that I've been analyzing and reading called The Sovereign Individual. So this book was written in the 1990s and it predicted what would happen. It's actually tracked what technology has done to governments and the individual over the past 10,000 years. And it tracks all of these technological evolutions. Like, for example, when the invention of gunpowder come along and everybody had free access to a gun, governments had to be less oppressive to the citizens, because now instead of the government being, in the feudal age, they were all knights riding on horseback and they had, trained samurai people cutting down the citizens who were these untrained civilians. the government was able to be very oppressive because the technology at that time significantly favored the government or the people who could control that technology. So that's what this book tracks. It just tracks how does technology change government and change people. And in the 1990s, this book was predicting what would a digital form of money do to governments and society. And they said, how would the nation state fight back against this digital money or this digital revolution that would arise in the digital age? Because now we've got 3D printed guns. We've got encrypted messaging. We have a digital money in the form of Bitcoin that governments can't stop, can't censor, can't track, and can't debase. Okay, that's the really big one that I was banging on for hours about earlier. But I really wanted to highlight the fact that all of the bad things in society, all of the financial collapses, they're a consequence of governments being able to manipulate the money. So Bitcoin, 21 million supply, you can't manipulate it, you can't change it. So the sovereign individual was saying, okay, with encryption, 3D printed guns, a digital money, naturally the nation state or the government would be scared and freaked out. Okay, that's a lot of power you're taking out of their hands and giving to the individual person who has nearly free access to digitally encrypted money, digitally encrypted messaging apps, and a 3D printer where you can print your own guns and firearms. That significantly empowers the individual. So naturally, and this book tracked all different scenarios that governments might react to stifling the individual or stopping the individual from accessing all of this power that technology brings. And they predicted, this was written in the 1990s, they predicted governments might create a fake bioweapon or a fake biological virus as an excuse to lock down the individual and the digital nomads who would want to travel to the tax havens around the world. So if you can store all your money in your mind or in the brain, and you can simply hop to any tax safe haven you want to, naturally people would be traveling and they would be moving from the most oppressive governments who have the 40 to 50% egregious tax rates, and they would move to a government like Panama or Mexico or Portugal. They would move to a tax safe haven. So this book predicted, okay, how would government stop that? They could create a biological weapon, shut down borders and lock people, lock the digital nomads in their country. I had to jump in there with the sovereign individual because that's
that's good. Yeah, I'm gonna check that out, definitely.
Highly recommended reading. But so I think we were talking about, before I went down that tangent, we're talking about the protests on the rise in 2019. This is also kind of ties into kind of explaining the really unique position that we find ourselves here in the 2020s. A lot of people didn't see all of this coming. They're surprised by the protests. They're surprised by the civil unrest. They're surprised by the government mandated lockdowns and control grabs. But this has been predicted and written about for literally hundreds of years. This is just a natural cycle playing out. So before we talked about the 100-year long-term debt cycle, that isn't the only cycle that we're at the very conclusion of. Okay, these cycles cause the most change at the very end. Right now, we're actually at the end of something called the fourth turning. So this is a 90-year cycle. And if you trace this back every 90 years in history over the past 500 years, you've seen significant revolution or change or uprising every 90 years. Sounds crazy at face value, but let's have a look at it. 90 years ago from today, in the fourth turning. So the fourth turning is a 20-year period between the 1920s and the 1940s. What did we see during the fourth turning, which is supposed to be the most chaotic part of this 90-year cycle? In the fourth turning, we saw a massive populist rise up. We saw World War II. We saw the rise of Hitler, Mussolini. We saw the Great Depression. That was also the end of the 80-year long-term debt cycle. And then if you look 90 years before then, before the 1930s, to the previous fourth turning, you've got the American Civil War. You go another 90 years before that, you've got the American Revolution and the founding of America as a free and open capitalistic country. So I think that's a really interesting kind of predictive model or a predictive cycle that kind of predicts, hey, This was written in the 1990s, by the way, this fourth turning. It said, hey, that period of time between 2008 and 2030, it's going to be chaotic.
Yeah. And I think it's fascinating. And I have eyes on America all the time, or the US, before Australia. I always has, and I go back, and it's interesting. What we're seeing now is, and it's interesting, every 90 years that's happened. You go back to the revolution over there. I love that that's what it was. What's playing out in America right now is literally taking a lot of people back to the founding fathers, the founding of their constitution and everything like that, and then them core values and everything. So many more people, especially that I'm connected to in America now, that's where they're taking it back to. It's like, we've got to return to this. With everything that's gone on in these two cycles, that's the good parts of that. We've got to return to it. And it's, you're going to say something, say go.
Yeah, so that's the thing about this fourth turning cycle, this 90-year cycle. It goes in periods. And the reason the fourth turning is normally very chaotic and very messy is because by the fourth turning, people are very kind of collectivist. They're very socialist by this kind of stage of the cycle. It's a generational cycle, and it's ridiculously accurate. So it's based on this motto. Okay, this motto is, it's hard times create weak men. Weak men create hard times. Hard times create strong men. Strong men create good times. Good times create weak men. Yeah, and it's this cycle that's kind of self-perpetuates. And that's what gives you the fourth turnings. And every 90 years, the pendulum swings, okay? And every 90 years, power shifts in these 90-year cycles. And at the end of the 90-year cycle, and when you go from the first to the second to the third and to the fourth turning, by the time you're at the fourth turning, everybody is really laid back, okay? Everybody hasn't experienced the Great Depression, and all of this power has centralized at the top, and it centralizes at the governments. And this is what brings about revolutions, because normally it takes a large event like 2008 financial crisis or the 1929 massive stock market crash. It takes a massive catalytic event to wake everybody up and say, hang on a minute, these aren't really good times. This is a little bit, everybody's a little frail, everybody's a little weak. The culture has kind of decayed in society. There's too much power in the institutions. So you're seeing that with the World Economic Forum. Governments have too much power. And every single time in the fourth turning, it always ends in revolution and change. So I think that's a really interesting cycle that helps to explain.
You know what ties into that too? Yeah, the cycle that ties in, and we touched on this before the call, is like the full demasculation of men in our society right now. And this is the big play, because with that cycle you've just described, the weak men creating hard times.
Yeah.
In the hard times, that's where the strong men come through. Like right now, I see we're in this time now, and this is actually the point of like wild man revolution from my part, to bring men together who have been chiseled, so to say, prepared for this time, where at the same time, the demasculation of men is there. What are these powers that think they're in charge of us afraid of? The strong men that are created through hard times, because that cycle keeps going. If they can demasculate the men till they don't uprise or revolt, and not to go into the protest mode, to fucking do their thing, to be the best version of themselves, to speak their truth, to be their truth, to create massive change, to be the entrepreneur, but also be the leader, like bringing solutions to there. If they can eradicate that and wipe that out, that cycle doesn't perpetuate anymore.
That's right.
But that can't happen. It can't, because there's too many of us men that are awake to that. But you don't have to look far.
Yeah, so that's what's really scary. That is what's really scary, because generally every 90 years you have a revolution. The people rise up and they say, we've had a fuck enough. We're also on the precipice of a 250-year revolutionary cycle. So if you follow this back 200,
I fucking love this, man. This is awesome.
So it's really all of these cycles are converging to this particular 10 to 15 year window being potentially the most transformative few years in human history. Okay, you're on the precipice of long-term debt cycle concluding. That's an 80 to 100-year cycle. You've got the 90-year fourth turning cycle. You've got the 250-year revolutionary cycle. So you can, if you go back 250 years, we had the American Revolution in the 1770s, you had the Industrial Revolution and the French Revolution. If you go back another 250 years before then, what you saw was the Protestant Revolution. So that was actually the separation of church and state. Okay. And I actually...
That right there, man, we might have to talk off air about what I'm into now around the crown, around linked into the birth certificates, linked to all of that. That time right there, a lot of the work I'm doing is to take me in my sovereignty, let's say, back to them.
Yeah. We'll have to do that one off air because I've been having a little look into it and it's very interesting.
I was a 4-hour study group last night.
Oh, shit. Take me to the next one. But we're so a lot of these, so we saw the separation of church and state back in the 1500s, and the printing press was the tool that widely distributed information in the form of Bibles to everybody around the world. So everybody could read the Bible and say, hang on a minute, maybe the church is colluding with the state or the government. Maybe it's colluding. Maybe we can use this tool in the form of a printing press, and we're just going to reject and shun what the church is saying. We don't need them anymore. And that led to the separation of money and state. The separation of church and state. And I think the same way that humanity used the printing press as a tool to separate the two, I think Bitcoin's the tool that we're going to finally, for the first time in 5,000 years, separate money and state. So that's what they want, though. You touched on they want to demasculate the man. They don't want the man to be able to revolt. In this digital prison that they want to put us in into the future with a central bank digital currency, they have cameras on every single corner of every single street in China. They have facial recognition technology that links up to your central bank digital currency wallet that's in your pocket. What they want is the ability to completely squash out any revolutions. They don't want any of these 90-year revolutionary cycles going into the future. What the World Economic Forum and your government, yes, the Australian government, yes, the United States government, the European government, they've all agreed to this Agenda 2030 put forward and proposed by the World Economic Forum. A lot of people say, oh no, it's a war between China and the United States. Wrong. That's a distraction. The real war is being waged by the nation states. They've all signed on, they've all agreed, and it's a war against the individual. It's a war against the sovereign individual. They want to completely wipe out all of these cycles going forward into the future. So there's no revolution. So there's no change. They don't want the people to be able to revolt, change the financial system and make it more fair and equitable. They want to essentially keep us in a self-perpetuating, not a cycle. They want to keep us in a forever cycle where we're all serfs and we need to beg to use their money. We need a really good social credit score. We need to obey. You mentioned the fact they want to demasculate the man. I couldn't agree more. I mean, the soy products being put in food, I think that's a really interesting rabbit hole that people should probably check out. If you have a look at soy and how it causes your body to produce estrogen, so the opposite of testosterone, there's some really interesting correlations in the 1980s and the 1990s when they started really pushing these soy products on everybody. Have a look at the fertility rates or the birth rates since the 1980s or 90s. It's actually been on the decline since 1990s.
Yeah.
So
that's like the agenda around veganism. And I know I've got a lot of vegans and I know I've got a lot of people who are probably like soy products and everything out there, but there are so many things, if you dig into it, that tie into that agenda alone. The meat thing. Yeah. But I like all of these agendas, what's happening, but it's actually getting people to question this more. For me, I give up meat, and this is without going on too much of a tangent. When I started my awakening, like in spirituality and everything, I'm like, all right, I'm going to become vegan. That lasted 2 weeks. I'm going to be a pescatarian, but I didn't eat red meat for 12 months. My body, my biology didn't agree with that. I thought I was super healthy, but I was no energy, none of that stuff. I felt I had less confidence. All these things that come in our natural biology, like testosterone, if you really look into testosterone, how important it is for us as a man. And as we got older, we have less of it naturally anyway, and throw all these other external fucking things into it. You got to have this to be healthy. You get this, or whoever's supplying the fake meat or whatever it is.
Yeah. Well, they like, I love that you brought up red meat, because a lot of the Bitcoiners in the Bitcoin community, they're all carnivores. Because once you question the money and you find out the government's been fucking with the money for the past 50 years, you also go down lots of other rabbit holes and you find out that, hang on, government's been messing with big pharma and the food industry. They don't make money off the meat and the farmers. The profit margins are very low, okay? Yeah. They want you to be eating that processed carbohydrate meal. They say, oh yeah, rice and pasta is good for you. Go and eat processed carbohydrates. And that, if you have a look at the correlation of the boom of all these processed high fructose corn syrup based foods, you track that chart with the correlation of obesity. You track that chart with the correlation of heart disease and cancer. They want you sick, so that they want you eating the garbage foods, so they want you sick. They want you eating the sludge and sick, so that you're reliant on big pharma's pills for the rest of your life. So then that also funds big pharma. And just the thing about the red meat, the reason why a lot of Bitcoiners are carnivores, we've biologically evolved on only eating red meat. What did we do for the past hundreds of thousands of years when we were hunters and gatherers? We certainly weren't eating processed cereals, despite the government saying, oh no, the cereal's good, it's got fiber, it's good for you. No.
Man, the 5 food groups. Like,
who
made up that shit?
Yeah, you should be eating the majority of your food coming from healthy grains, bread and cereals. That's all good for you. No, that's false. We've eaten red meat for hundreds of thousands of years.
Man, it doesn't surprise me, like I say, and I love how you've linked it in. I love how you say the Bitcoiners and everything. It's people who question. People who ask questions, you get curious. And for me, on my journey around health, I'm massive on health. I help clients with it and everything like that from an intuitive place. And doing these things, getting curious about it. When I didn't eat red meat for 12 months, it wasn't until I'm like, fuck this, I just want a steak. And I had a steak and it felt like I had a line of cocaine.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay.
Yeah, it gives you
what just happened?
Yeah.
Like, and it's like anything in life has been intuitive and come back to when you start to question these things yourself. You start to, the information will be there, but you're available for the information on this. Again, it's like the monetary system. When you question it, they've had all these instances across eons in humanity that's given us an opportunity to question things. When we question it now, there's more people questioning so many different angles to this than ever. That's when you start to get different answers. And you need them different answers to go, oh, if that's a different answer, like exactly, the Bitcoin is going, all right, I'm going to question this. I'm going to question this. And they become carnivores. Now, I haven't gone to that extreme myself because I actually like certain elements. I like having my toast every now and then with some butter on it. I like having some greens every now and then because I feel good after it. But there's none of this, you have to have this. I can't eat cereal. I have cereal and I want to go to sleep.
Yeah.
Automatically, a few years ago, that told me, like, wait a second, I'm super fucking healthy, like all this sort of stuff, but I have cereal and I feel tired. It's not for me. Yeah. When we question this, we start to make our own mind up. We start to get the result ourselves. That's when we start to take different actions. We start to do things differently. And we start to, the authorities in our life, doesn't matter if it's fucking government, parents, spouses or anything, the authority, they become less of an authority because we become our own authority. And this is actually to bring this back to Bitcoin and the decentralized element of it, the true decentralized element of it. We're becoming the authority over our own money, around what we can do. Can you talk into that a bit more?
Yeah, so this is where Bitcoin comes in. Whenever we use gold as money, gold's really clunky. And if everybody knows that you're really rich and you've maybe got 100 ounces of gold in your back room a couple of 100 years ago, naturally you would get invaded and somebody would come to steal your money. And that's kind of where governments arose. Since the agricultural revolutions, governments kind of arose to protect its citizens. Governments popped up and said, hey, you know what? We'll take the monopoly on violence, but we'll protect your money and your savings in the form of gold. So that's where Bitcoin's really revolutionary, because for the first time in human history, we can store our money in a way that we don't actually need governments involved in it. We can transact our money without governments getting in between it. Like, for example, you can get really technical with Bitcoin. You can actually have your Bitcoin set up so that you can split your Bitcoin wallet into 5 or 10 different pieces called a multi-signature wallet. And I could right now, if somebody come to put a gun to my head to take my Bitcoin, they actually couldn't do it because I can't physically spend my Bitcoin unless I go and get 10 keys that I've distributed in different places a long way from my house. So I would have to get on a plane to go and get one of my keys to bring all the keys together to be able to spend my Bitcoin. So that is really kind of revolutionary when you think about, hang on a minute, you could have $100 million in wealth stored in 10 different countries around the world, and no government or no person could make you spend your Bitcoin or make you or could steal from you. That completely changes the logic of violence. That completely changes how we cooperate as a society. That completely kind of defunds war, okay? If you're using a form of money that governments can't take from you, and for example, Hitler can't invade Europe and take all of your gold, that completely kind of de-incentivizes violence. Moving forward on a Bitcoin standard, if you know you can't steal from someone and the only way that you can get wealth is to build a profitable business and provide value to somebody, that's the only way you can get Bitcoin. It kind of completely reimagines how society may look or may form. It's really revolutionary. Just how Bitcoin is and how you can take custody of it is really interesting. But I won't go too far down that rabbit hole.
Yeah, I like it. The image it flashes up for me with the key codes for the atom bombs, that you got to have 3 different people with 3 different keys and 3 different things. They've got to come in and switch it at exactly the same time.
Yeah,
like you say, with the split, there's so many different elements you can bring into like Bitcoin. You've given one great example: 10 places, 10 different codes or 10 different keys and all this sort of stuff, just to get access to your Bitcoin. Like, where's the incentive for someone to come and get it off you? They're going to say, no, that's too fucking hard. Exactly. That's the fucking point.
Yeah.
Like, what is the point? And the purpose of wars and stuff anyway, it's either to come and it's to get your resources. That's all it is. It's nothing else. It's like, I don't know if I want to go into the Afghanistan one. You got the opium trade, and you've also got is it lithium? Yeah. Like, all these different things. It's nothing to do with what they say, but they can do it because there's something physical there that they can go, okay, we'll just muscle our way in here and do this. We'll take your money. We'll take over your bank. We'll take your gold. We'll take your fucking opium fields or whatever. But Bitcoin being digital, and you can have, again, coming back to you being the authority over what you do with it, you can split that there. Now, depends what happens, how you're going to put in your will. Who cares about that down the track? There's my 10 Kikos to 10 different grandkids. Yeah. No, but that's so important for people to understand. And without going into other cryptos and that, because generally what happens when people talk about Bitcoin, and this was even me on my journey of understanding it, they'll go, oh, but this one does this, or this one does that, or this one does this. But can you just talk to the centralized factor without going into all them, just as a conversation versus? Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah. Do you want me to compare the two, Bitcoin versus crypto, or do you want me to leave it, just focus a little bit more on Bitcoin?
Focus on Bitcoin, but just give a Bitcoin versus just a little bit to give some contrast.
Yeah. Okay. So let's look at the Bitcoin versus Ethereum. So Ethereum's the most decentralized cryptocurrency. That's all of the other cryptocurrencies like Solana.
PS, if you're listening, he had his 2 fingers up each side in inverted commas. Most decentralized.
Yeah, I had the inverted quotations when I said decentralized, and I associated that to Ethereum. So let's compare Bitcoin and Ethereum, because Ethereum says it's the most decentralized altcoin apart from Bitcoin. Everybody knows that Bitcoin's the only thing that's actually decentralized. 200,000 nodes around the world, and it has no founders. Okay, when Satoshi put Bitcoin out as a protocol, there was no pre-mine with Bitcoin. The Bitcoin supply was essentially at 0, and anybody around the world could have got on their computer and started mining Bitcoin. Okay, so there's no pre-mine. If you look at Ethereum, they actually, so for starters, they're very centralized. nobody can run a node on Ethereum. So if you can't run a node, you essentially don't have a vote in that protocol. So that means Ethereum, their founder Vitalik, can push through any change on the Ethereum protocol that he wants. He can change the rules at any time because there isn't 200,000 node runners on the Ethereum protocol to vote no to that change. So in Bitcoin, if somebody wanted to increase the supply of Bitcoin above 21 million, I would vote no. I run a node, so I wouldn't have to update my node. I've got a fair say in that system. Doesn't matter how much money you've got in the Bitcoin system. If you run a node, anybody can do it on their laptop. If you run a node, you vote as to who changes the rules of the system. So if you look at Ethereum, that's completely different. In 2016, there was a hack in Ethereum, and a lot of the richer people like Vitalik and some of his cronies in the Ethereum Foundation lost a little bit of money from the hack. And they said, you know what? We're going to completely reverse the code in the protocol, and we're going to make a complete hard fork. And obviously nobody wanted that because you're changing the protocol. If code isn't law and you can rewrite the blockchain, you're not really decentralized. Are you really immutable? Is your blockchain really immutable? Can governments stop transactions on your blockchain? If you and your cronies can just rewrite the rules like that, are you really decentralized? So that's one aspect where Ethereum's not decentralized because it's too hard to run a node on Ethereum. The block sizes are very large, and the everyday person can't run a node. So all of the nodes, I think 80% of the nodes on the Ethereum network are actually running on top of the one centralized AWS cloud server called Infura. So governments wanted to stop Ethereum, they can just essentially shut down that server, the Infura server, and it's game over. I mean, we also talk, so that's one aspect of why Ethereum's not decentralized. And so what Vitalik can then do, because it's not decentralized, he can change the rules all the time. So if I were to pull up a chart of the Ethereum monetary policy, you can actually have a look and see that the monetary policy or the rules around inflation and deflation have changed multiple times, nearly 8 times. So for anyone at home listening in, I've just pulled up a chart of the Ethereum monetary policy. And it's just like our current financial system with the Australian dollar. Whenever the government wants to bend the rules, it can just change the rules. And like the 2008 banking crisis and the massive bailout, when the government wants to change the rules, it can just change the rules. We don't get a vote in it. It's the same in Ethereum and all of these other cryptocurrencies. The rules can be changed. The blockchain can be rewritten. So that hack I was talking about was the DAO hack in 2016. A hacker hacked the smart contracts and got about 10% of the supply out of Ethereum. Vitalik and a lot of his rich friends lost a lot of money. So they said, you know what? Tough shit. We're going to change the rules. We're going to rewrite the blockchain and we're going to create a hard fork. So that's where Ethereum Classic actually came from. It came from that hard fork. So that's one aspect. And then another aspect of why Ethereum isn't decentralized is it had a 70% pre-mine. So when they created Ethereum, 70% of the total supply was actually just given to Vitalik and all of his cronies who were a part of the pre-sale. That actually wasn't available for the everyday population or the poor person. They just said, oh, no, sorry, you only get access to 30% of the supply that gets put onto the market later. So, of course, Bitcoin, that's completely different. As we talked about earlier, anybody could have spun up a computer and started mining Bitcoin in 2009. Anybody could have had access to mine the first Bitcoin block. That's different in Ethereum. 70% of the supply was pre-mined and given to Vitalik and his cronies. And they use that supply for various different things, like incentivizing people to come and build smart contracts on the platform. That's why there's a lot of smart contracts on Ethereum. People say, why isn't all the innovation on Bitcoin? Why is there so much innovation on Ethereum? Why do they have such a flourishing ecosystem of stuff happening on Ethereum? It's because Vitalik was able to incentivize all the people to come and build all of this worthless crap on top of Ethereum in the early days. Now, all of this kind of gets back to comparing Bitcoin versus all of these other cryptocurrencies. So Ethereum says, hey, look, we're the smart contract building platform. You can come and build smart contracts on top of our platform. You can come do stuff like DeFi. You can come and be your own bank on the Ethereum platform. You can do a little bit of gaming. The current craze is the NFT craze that's going on in Ethereum. Come and mint your own NFTs. Come do all of that on top of Ethereum. Now, what they fail to say is you can actually do all of that on Bitcoin. You just can't do it on the Bitcoin base layer. So the base layer is very old, very rigid, very safe. Okay, you can't change the Bitcoin base layer. 21 million coins. The Bitcoin programmers don't want any smart contracts in on the base layer because it adds vulnerabilities or risks. So if you have a look at the 2016 hard fork in Ethereum, where the DAO smart contract got hacked, it caused the entire Ethereum network to have to do a hard fork. So when you're adding smart contracts into the base layer, it adds vulnerabilities, makes your base layer more hackable. So Bitcoin can do all of these smart contract functionability. I can't say that word, but Bitcoin can do everything Ethereum wants to do, but it just does it on different layers. So on top of Bitcoin, there's something called the Lightning Network. So that's a layer of smart contracts called a layer 2. And on the Bitcoin Lightning Network, you can do instant transactions. It can do like 25 million transactions per second. Okay. The Bitcoin base layer is a little bit slower. You can only, we have 10-minute blocks, but on the Lightning Network, you can get instant transactions. So that completely kills the use case of Cardano. That's a very popular one. Ripple, that's a very popular one because they market themselves as saying, hey, look, yeah, Bitcoin's got a limited supply in 21 million. That's great, but it's a little bit slow. It only has 10-minute block times. So come and use Ripple or Cardano. But whenever you listen to an interview of Charles Hoskinson, he never once mentions the Bitcoin Lightning Network. Why does he not mention that? Because it completely kills the use case of Cardano, Ripple, Stellar Lumens. I think that's another crypto that is focused on fast transactions. So you can get instant transactions on a Bitcoin layer 2 called the Lightning Network. Now let's look at the smart contracts that Ethereum claims to do. Ethereum says, yeah, that's cool, Bitcoin. That's cool that you've got a $21 million hard cap supply. That's cool, but you're a little bit slow. You don't let smart contracts onto the base layer. So we're going to do all of that on top of Ethereum with the whole Solidity programming language. But what the Ethereum guys fail to mention is the fact that you can do smart contracts on top of Bitcoin. So you got Bitcoin, the base layer chain. That doesn't get changed. There's no smart contracts. But then on top of that, you have layer 2. So that's the Lightning Network. And then on top of that, you have layer 3. So that's called the Liquid Network or Liquid Layer, whatever they call it. But you can do smart contracts on top of Liquid. The same smart contracts you can do on top of Ethereum. But of course, the Ethereum people won't mention this because it completely kills the use case of Ethereum. Yeah. There's also something called a side chain. It's called RSK or rootstock. And you can actually, it has the same smart contract compatibility that Ethereum has. So you can do all of the smart contracts on Ethereum, but you can do them on what's called RSK. So that's a side chain that uses Bitcoin's security protocol. So it's much more secure than Ethereum, because when they transition to proof of stake, like Cardano, Harmony One, Algorand, they're all proof of stake financial systems. So that makes them very vulnerable to attack, because the people who hold all of the supply or hold all of the stake, they essentially control the rules of that protocol. That's completely different to Bitcoin. In Bitcoin, the people who enforce the rules are the 200,000 people who run the nodes, and we all get an equal say in all of these proof of stake chains like Ethereum, Cardano, Algorand. Who makes the rules over there is the people who hold all of the stake or all of the supply. And in Ethereum's case, Vitalik just gave himself 70% of the supply with a pre-mine.
Yeah, I think there's a few things in that, and one that I like to look at. Like, I'm an investor, and I hold some of the ones you're talking about, but I've got a timeline. Done my research and everything on this, and I'll swing trade some around. But the more I look at one like Theta Network. Now, on the surface, it's a great investment, and like, I know there's a lot of listeners out there that listen to me that have looked at it and go, "Oh wow, that's got huge upside." But I look at the way it's a proof of stake. It's got a huge percentage staked. Out of that huge percentage of stake, the companies that are involved in it that run nodes by holding a certain amount of stake are Google, Sony. They've got control over that. They hold huge portions. And I read, and this is where I made the link myself without knowing how much, they're there because what I was looking at it for personally was censorship. YouTube's screwed. I did 3 videos there 18 months ago and they got taken down. 3 videos. I'm like, I'm not a YouTube influencer or anything like that. I'm like, just because of the stuff I said. Like, cool, I've always been looking Facebook. I've been kicked off Facebook a few times. And I know many people that listen to me, same thing. What's decentralized? I'm going to go to Theta Network, crypto, everything. I read their rules. They still have moderators. You can put a video up. It might go on a blockchain and be decentralized, but their selling point of decentralized. And it's like, no, but if they decide that doesn't fit what they want on their platform, they take it down. And I link that back. Well, this is Google's play, YouTube's play, the decentralizing. They're moving across. They've already got this, and that's where proof of stake for me, if they don't have certain rules to minimize what big stakeholders can have and all this, it just becomes another centralized system. Even if the blockchain is decentralized in just it's there, but who's proving that there with the stake? They've got a certain portion. So it's just something that I've been very conscious of. The other thing with the Bitcoin and Lightning Network is, and this is where I touched on this before off air, like Jack Dorsey, Twitter, like I call him Communist Jack because, but it's been fascinating to see he also runs, and a lot of people might know this, Square, which is a payments platform. I encourage everyone to look at their bank details when they go to a shop now, when they go somewhere and see where it actually transacts through. More often than not, it transacts through Square. Now that's his company. Now, he's been talking up Bitcoin and more to the point, the Lightning Network. Like he's looking at with social media, like there's a monetary thing. There's lots of that have tried out there without taking it into a tangent like this to monetize social media, so on and so forth, and reward. Theta Network being one of them. And there's a bunch of others, but him in Twitter has been talking about bringing something like this in, but from the place of he runs Square. So for payments, when he started talking about this, I'm like, I'm not going to change my opinion of him, but he's an entrepreneur. He's fucking smart. He's not silly. He's got a big say in things that happen in the social media sort of space. He's got a lot of pull. Why is he going into Lightning Network? He's getting ahead of the curve.
Why is he Bitcoin only?
Exactly, because there are them layers you talk about that the other companies, it's all a marketing machine, and people have got to understand this. One of the biggest things, and I know this being involved with another company who's doing different things. They've got an Ethereum token and building their own blockchain, very centralized, but they're very open. They go, yeah, we're centralized. Where we're doing this, I've learned some things in their process where it's like, where was I going with that?
I know where you're going. You were talking about why is Jack Dorsey focusing on Bitcoin and Bitcoin only? And I was just I was going to pull up a little news article that I saw just the other day from a week ago. But Jack's actually integrating the ability to add Bitcoin addresses to your Twitter profile. And Jack is also building a decentralized exchange. So he's actually going out there and building or working with decentralized exchange holders for Bitcoin people, because we touched a lot about why all of these other cryptos aren't decentralized. I think another protocol or example that came to mind was Uniswap. Anybody who's into crypto and has heard of DeFi has heard of Uniswap. It's the largest decentralized exchange out there. They market themselves as being completely immutable, completely decentralized, and they looked as if they were for the first couple of months. But then they got a tap on the shoulder. Their founder, Hayden, got a tap on the shoulder only a couple of months ago and said, hey, look, you can't have all of this going on. And lo and behold, only a couple of weeks ago, Uniswap had to take down 100 smart contracts or 100 trading pairs from their website. So that's just the very tip of the iceberg. There's a lot more of that to come. And another DeFi protocol that claimed to be decentralized was Wi-Fi. It came out and marketed itself as a coin having a limited supply, just like Bitcoin. But lo and behold, 6 months goes by and the Wi-Fi core developers and the founders of Wi-Fi say, hey, why don't we just increase the Wi-Fi supply by 10%? They market themselves as being decentralized, but all of a sudden they show their hand. And even the most decentralized protocols like Uniswap, Wi-Fi, and Ethereum, they laugh about being decentralized, but they're not actually decentralized. So that's why Jack is out there trying to build an actual decentralized exchange. And I think he's got his hands tied a little bit at Twitter. He doesn't have the majority control of what's going on there. A lot of Bitcoiners, myself included, we're pretty pissed off with the amount of censorship that's on Twitter. It's a lot better than Facebook and it's a lot better than Instagram, much better, but there's still censorship on there. And that's why we call him Commie Jack too from time to time. But I think he's trying to build a decentralized exchange. And he's also floated the idea of building another decentralized social media platform. So it sounds like he wants to make essentially a Twitter 2.0, where he's actually in control of it. I tried to bring up the Google before when you were talking, but I couldn't find the name of it.
It's a fascinating thing. Like I say, it really fascinates me, and it did with the Bitcoin Lightning Network, because I looked into it too, and it's the layers and the solutions. I think we might have to save some of what I was going to talk about then. I'm not going to go on another tangent. We've been going into this. Is so much in here, but this is good. This is good. Yeah. Bitcoin, again, it's another reason why it is truly is the decentralized one, and why it is a big solution now. I'm cool with cryptocurrency projects, development teams, and everything like this. If they are open and say, we are centralized, this is where I was going before. We are centralized. Yeah. We are a business. This is our business model. This is our thing. And they don't sell themselves as we're gonna be, because that's what most of them do. We're gonna be the most decentralized. We've just got to get to this upgrade, and this grade. I think it's just smoke and mirrors. Now, good on them if they do hit that and they do become fully decentralized. But in the essence of that, they're centralized. This is why Bitcoin stands alone easily, again, from even an investor. I'm an investor. Coming in and investing, like, aside from the solution to the monetary system and that, for me, integrity is important. Any of these companies or these protocols or any of these development teams selling anything is decentralized, already for me, that's like a red flag. It's like trust my investment long-term with something like this. If they can make changes, the Ethereum example you gave is a great one. They can just decide, nah, we got hacked. We're going to do this. It's for your own good. What does the government do, guys? Yeah. Like, this is for your own good. Here's a stimulus. We're going to do an airdrop. This is what the centralized, they can do whatever they fucking want. We're going to reverse the code. We're going to add, it's going to be a better one or whatever, just gives us more control. When you start to look at it through these eyes, like I say, and you understand again why Bitcoin in its current form, like they had a recent vote, didn't they? To what's the latest upgrade for Bitcoin?
So they're adding Taproot.
Privacy. Yeah, Taproot. So that's the number. Yeah.
Taproot's going live in November. So that's going to enable more privacy onto the Bitcoin network. So every single transaction, whether it's a multi-signature transaction or whether it's a channel to open a Lightning channel, all of those transactions will be completely transparent on chain. The government's looking at those transactions, won't be able to differentiate the difference between all of those transactions. So Taproot goes live in November, and with Bitcoin, they needed 90% of the miners to signal that they were happy with that change. That was only a soft fork, so it wasn't a hard fork. But a soft fork is still a change, and we still needed 90% of the miners to be okay with that change. And
I remember why I remember that, because there was so much FUD out there about, oh, they don't think it's going to happen and all this sort of stuff. And then when it went through, it was like 90% was done, like got verified, and it was really, really quick. They voted on it. But that's the thing. And I think for the listeners to really understand the power of the people, and this is why Jack Dorsey, again, the way he promoted it recently, it's like, this is giving power to the people. This is the true only there. Whether that's a cover from him or not, or whether that's truly what it is. And like I say, his hands are tied at Twitter and all that sort of thing. But it does give power back to the people. And I said it before about being the authority over your own money, over your own currency, over your own decisions, having your power. Bitcoin can be that, or is that, when you get to learn and understand it.
That's right, because governments always sell their manipulation in money as good for the people. They say, yeah, this massive $20 trillion expansion of the balance sheets in 2020 as a response to COVID is good for the people. And they give you a 1,200 stimmy check to distract you from where the other 99% of that $20 trillion of money is going. And it's always going to the bankrupt cronies in the corporations. Qantas is a great example of this for the Australian viewers. They're bankrupt. They needed a bailout from the government, so the government's printed money and gave it to them. And Qantas are also the first airline to, mandate vaccines. So it wouldn't surprise me at all.
That's a trade-off.
Yeah, in order to get that printed money, because they were bailout, they had to corrupt themselves, and they probably had to make a promise. You know what? The government wants us to mandate vaccines on all Qantas flights. Yeah, we're going to do it because we need the money. So that's the really important thing to highlight with all these other altcoins. They'll always say, oh, no, but upgrading Ethereum to proof of stake, that hard fork we need to push through, it's good for the Ethereum people. So let's just push it through. You don't want to trust anyone. And I think it's also important to notice the Ethereum miners didn't get any vote in the most recent hard fork in Ethereum. They were just booted off the network. And Vitalik just said, sorry, boys, pack her up. You don't get a vote in the system because I'm the crony who owns it. So he can just push through any votes he wants. And he markets it to the Ethereum people as, no, it's good. Trust us to make the changes that is good for you. And it sounds a lot like governments. No, trust us. Us manipulating in the money supply is good for you. It's good for the economy. Just trust us. And that's where Bitcoin comes in, and it's completely different. It's a financial system that nobody can manipulate, nobody can change, and you don't need to trust anyone. If you run your own node, you're your own ruler, okay? Bitcoin's a financial system where everybody follows the same rules and there are no rulers. The current legacy financial system and Ethereum and all of these other altcoins, they're all the same and they're in a completely different bucket to Ethereum. You need to trust somebody else. There is a ruler, whether it's the government's, a central bank, or whether it's Vitalik Buterin in Ethereum. There's a ruler who can change the rules. There are rulers who can change the rules. And Bitcoin's a financial system or a financial protocol where there are no rulers. Everybody follows the same rules. I love to drive that point home to people because that's a really big point that a lot of people miss when they're new and they come into the space. Another reason a lot of people speculate on the altcoins is because they think they're late to Bitcoin. They think
it's too expensive.
Yeah. Sorry, I was just taking a drink, but people think they're late to Bitcoin. It's gone from $0 to 70,000 Australian dollars or Australian pesos, as I like to call them. And they think, oh, I'm late to Bitcoin. But what they're misunderstanding is we're very, very early to Bitcoin. If Bitcoin is the next financial system, currently it's only adopted by 1% of people globally. So because there's a cap supply of Bitcoin in 21 million, we can actually do some maths. There's $2.2 quadrillion in the world. And if Bitcoin is the next financial system, you can do some really simple maths and you go 2.2 quadrillion divide by 21 million Bitcoin, and it gives you a price of Bitcoin $100 million per coin. And a lot of people who are new to Bitcoin also have the common misconception that, oh, Bitcoin's $70,000, I can't buy a whole coin. A lot of people don't understand you can buy $1 worth of Bitcoin. You can buy $10 worth of Bitcoin. You can buy a fraction of a Bitcoin. So any new people that come in, I always say to them, look, just put some money into Bitcoin, get off zero, because if there's a long shot, okay, I'm not saying Bitcoin's 100% going to be the next global reserve currency asset, but if it is, it's going to be worth around $100 million a coin. Okay, it's just all the money in the world flows into Bitcoin. We've got 10,000 years of monetary history to show us every single time a new and better money comes along, all of the money of the old system flows into the new and better system. So that happened with seashells and copper and silver and gold. We've got 10,000 years of monetary history that shows us that. And right now, if Bitcoin is the next financial system, all of the money in the world will flow to the better and the new evolution of money, and that is Bitcoin. And if that happens, and if Bitcoin goes to $100 million per coin, which I think it does, and I think it happens this decade too, ladies and gentlemen, guess what? Every single dollar that you put into Bitcoin today is going to be worth $2,000 by the end of the decade, okay? So you need to sit there and ask yourself, nothing's 100% in the world, but you need to run a probabilistic analysis on the likelihood of each scenario. If you think there's a 1% chance that Bitcoin's the next money in the world, my goodness, you'd want at least 1% of your money in Bitcoin, because if you're wrong, you're going to miss out from potentially the greatest wealth transfer in human history. This right now, buying Bitcoin at $70,000, it's the equivalent to buying shares of the internet protocol itself in 1996. When everybody thought the internet was a joke in 1996 and it had 1% global adoption, everybody thought it was a joke. But that's Bitcoin's at the equivalent era, okay? We have 1% of the world has touched Bitcoin or bought some Bitcoin. And people really misunderstand how early we are and how quickly the rest of the world is waking up to Bitcoin. Because right now, since 2020, and that, you know, we talked about earlier, the 2008 global financial crisis being a really awakening event for a lot of people. The 2020 bailouts or the 2020 government mandated lockdowns was also a really big awakening event for the largest institutional money managers around the world. They watched the Fed and central banks globally print tens of trillions of dollars and essentially devalue their currency to be worthless. And since 2020, some of the biggest macroeconomic investors of all time have come to Bitcoin. We had Paul Tudor Jones, Stanley Druckenmiller, Ray Dalio, Bill Miller. They all come out in 2020 saying, hey, look, central banks are devaluing their money at an unprecedented rate. They just increased the money supply by 30%. Your $10,000 in the bank, yeah, it's still $10,000, but it's still the same size, okay? Your slice of the pie is still the same. Governments have just increased the size of that pie by 30%. Your savings have just been devalued by 30%. And we're watching the smartest people around the world wake up to the fact that we're at the end of the long-term debt cycle. Governments can't continue to debase their money like this forever. We're watching inflation pick up at an exponential rate here in 2021, and I think it's only going to get worse. And all of these people, Stanley Druckenmiller, Paul Tudor Jones, they're all running to Bitcoin. This is the first time or the first cycle in Bitcoin's 4-year bull markets that it goes through. This is the first cycle that we've actually got the largest money managers in the world interested in Bitcoin. We've got hedge funds interested in Bitcoin. We've got banks like JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, Citibank, BYN Mellon. All of the largest banks in the world are now allocating a Bitcoin. Just across the ditch from us, Steve, we got a pension fund called the Kiwi Saver. And over there, they allocated 5% of their total assets under management into Bitcoin, saying that we don't want to hold dollars. Okay, we think it's a risk to hold dollars because they're being devalued at such an unprecedented rate.
Yeah.
And pension funds are typically and historically the most conservative investors of all time. And they're allocating to Bitcoin. Mass Mutual is a 170-year-old pension fund in the United States. And they allocated hundreds of millions of dollars in Bitcoin in 2020, saying, hey, look, we need to allocate some to Bitcoin just in case it does catch on and continue to do its thing. And we're now watching. So we've got pension funds, we've got high net worth individuals, and we've got all the best macroeconomic investors of all time and hedge fund managers interested in Bitcoin. Guess who else has just become interested in Bitcoin after 2020, since that crossing of the Rubicon event, I like to call it? Yeah. We've now got goddamn nation states buying Bitcoin. So El Salvador is a country in Latin America of a population of 6 million people. And just recently, they have started accepting Bitcoin as legal tender.
It's a big deal. I talk to like my people who like tune into my stuff when I'm going into crypto and stuff. That's an entire nation. It's not a business, dude.
Yeah. Yeah.
It mightn't be fucking Australia, or it might be a huge country, but El Salvador, everything needs someone to go first.
Yes.
When someone goes first, it sets a precedent. Oh, they did it. Here's Brazil down the road. All right, they did it. We want to be on board. Oh, yeah. Fuck, we're missing out. Oh, wow. Ukraine's, even though they've been super active, countries are going, oh, that country's done it, and the IMF or the Fed or anything hasn't shut them down. They're going ahead with it. They're fucking doing it. The more it started something it's going to happen really fast now.
It is happening really fast. So El Salvador made the announcement 90 days ago. So 3 months ago, they made the announcement to make Bitcoin legal tender. That just went live 2 weeks ago, or maybe last week. Okay. And since that announcement, okay, you've had countries in Ukraine pushing to make Bitcoin. It's not legal tender, but it's just a crypto-related law. So you had Ukraine interested. You had Panama interested, pushing through a Bitcoin-related law. There's who else come out as well? I mean, one of the politicians in Mexico.
Was going to do his own bank and everything, like that. Yeah.
They have a population of like 100 million people. Brazil as well. Brazil's another massive country in Latin America. And they a massive country. And one of the politicians in Brazil's adopted the famous Bitcoin laser eyes on Twitter, indicating he's a Bitcoiner. We're on these Twitter Spaces live calls. And we actually had a central banker or an economist from Saudi Arabia pop into one of the Bitcoin spaces we were holding last week. And he was in there for hours with us asking questions about the economic system and Bitcoin. And we're watching a flood of these nation states come to the realization that, hang on a minute, we need some Bitcoin. We need to adopt Bitcoin for our people. Okay. The reason El Salvador adopted Bitcoin was because I think 70 to 80% of the people in El Salvador are actually unbanked. And when you try to send money to El Salvador, there's really egregious remittances. So Steve, if you and I want to both send $100 to a family member who's in El Salvador, well, Western Union, the banks, they actually take like a 30% cut. So when I send my $100 to my El Salvadorian brother, he only gets $70 on the other end of that, because Western Union can just cut and collect their remittances or their fees in the middle. But now that they've adopted Bitcoin, if I send him $100 worth of Australian dollars on the Lightning Network using this thing called the Strike app, my friend in El Salvador, he doesn't receive $70. He gets his whole $100 on the back end, okay? And that's all using Bitcoin. Bitcoin's a decentralized, open banking system that anybody can adopt around the world. And instead of 70% of the El Salvadorians not having a bank account, if you have a $50 smartphone, guess what? You've got a Bitcoin bank account, and no government around the world can stop that or influence that. Yeah. So I just think we're going to see more and more of these countries adopting Bitcoin. A parliamentary member who pops into these Twitter spaces with us from time to time as well is from Tonga, across the ditch in the islands near Samoa. And he wants to do the same thing for his people, because they have a massive amount of their money gets taken from the banks in the remittances. something like 20 to 30% of their economy or their GDP is made up from remittances. So it's the same thing. If I send $100 to a family member in Tonga, they don't get $100 on the other end. The banks in the middle cut their 30% fee out of the middle, and my friend in Tonga only gets $70. If they adopt Bitcoin over there in Tonga, I'll send him $100 and he'll get $100. And guess what? He'll get it instantly too. You don't have to wait a week for a fucking wire transfer using the traditional legacy banking financial system. But
I think that's one of the big things, and then this is where just with the other cryptos, how they market themselves as like cross-border payments and like Cardano, we're going into Africa. We've done deals with Africa because we've got to unbank them and all this. They know this. They understand that that's one of the biggest problems in the world is people don't have access to banking, but it's not banking, a monetary system that's for the people sort of thing. That's more or less what it is. That's a huge problem with the world, and they know this, and they market themselves and go, "This is the solution." And everything, but it's not. So many of them are so centralized that they're going to have a power that makes decisions still for the people. There's still a hierarchy there, and unless that does change, it's going to be just like this upgraded hierarchical system that we've already got now.
Yeah,
that's what I see. And like what you say with Bitcoin, with the Lightning Network and everything like that, and the El Salvador government, the way they've gone, we're going to give $30 of Bitcoin to everyone. Now, it's not like giving a stimulus to everyone. People are going to understand. I love the tweet that came out from the government when the exchange crashes the other day. And then they're like, El Salvador government, or like, "Oh, thank you, IMF, for that tweet," or whatever. We just bought another 550 Bitcoin. They're buying it themselves to have on their balance sheet, and that's their asset they're giving to the people to go, "Okay, you start using this." It's not like there's $30 to go buy a fucking TV. It's like, no, you start using the network to see how we don't take your money.
Yeah.
We're not the one controlling the Bitcoin network. We're nothing to do with it.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful. And that was really interesting watching the El Salvadorian president tweet at the IMF on that day, because there was a lot of speculation. He actually tweeted a day before El Salvador went live. He tweeted, "Prepare for FUD. Something's about to happen. The powers that be want to make this Bitcoin launch look bad." And there was actually what's called a DDoS attack on all of the exchanges the very moment that the El Salvadorian bill went live. So all the exchanges essentially stopped and they halted trading. And there was a lot of leverage in the Bitcoin system at the time. So naturally, you got a little bit of a crash and a little bit of a liquidation event. And I think Bitcoin dropped like 15 or 20%.
Well, it went 20%, but then it bounced straight back.
It's nearly back to where it is now. But it's just an example of the IMF and the powers that be trying their hardest to slow down Bitcoin or stop adoption, but that's all they can. That's all they can do, and that's all they can do is perform some really temporary DDoS attack on all of the centralized exchanges like Coinbase and Binance and Kraken. It doesn't actually affect the Bitcoin network, but it does scare off new people who are looking at that and don't understand it. But it isn't scaring off the smart people. Like,
they're just buying more. Michael Saylor just bought another. Saylor today.
Saylor just come out and bought millions of dollars worth of more Bitcoin just yesterday, and he's a publicly traded company. For anybody who doesn't know,
I like following what he does. I like him because when he was educating other businesses and investors last year, I'm like, that's actually where this makes a difference, and that happened last year.
Yeah.
So they're all listening to him and watching him. Yeah. And this stuff goes down. What happens when the market dips from FUD or crash?
Yeah.
He'll pop up.
Yeah. Like when Bitcoin recently crashed to about 40,000 Australian dollars, Michael Saylor was going ham in that dip. He was accumulating so much Bitcoin. And I love that you brought up the Michael Saylor's presentation he held earlier this year. Michael Saylor held a presentation for over 1,000 corporations and companies, teaching them how to buy Bitcoin. He held like a 3-day live event called Bitcoin for Corporations. And he said, look, this is how you get all the regulatory green ticks. This is how you jump this hurdle. This is how you purchase your Bitcoin. This is where you store your Bitcoin. Here's some great resources to learn about Bitcoin. And he open sourced his whole playbook to all of the people. And so Michael Saylor is the company, for anybody who doesn't know, who famously went all in Bitcoin in 2020. I think it was September of 2020. He had a $425 million sitting on his balance sheet in cash. And when he did a deep dive on the macroeconomic system, he essentially deemed that that money was losing 15 or 20% of its purchasing power per year. And he said, this is his words, "I've got $400 million of a melting ice cube sitting on my balance sheet. I need to put it into a form of money that can't be debased," and that's Bitcoin. And we're watching the smartest and the largest money managers around the world come to that realization that Bitcoin's the solution to the largest problem in human history. And we're watching them allocate hundreds of millions of dollars into Bitcoin. Michael Saylor currently has no cash on his balance sheet anymore. He's got $4 billion worth of Bitcoin though. And he famously influenced Elon Musk into buying some Bitcoin. Elon Musk bought $1.5 billion worth of Bitcoin for the same reason. And as much as all the FUD and the jokes and the bullshit Elon likes to promote around Twitter, he didn't sell any of his Bitcoin. He's still got his $1.5 billion worth of Bitcoin. As much as he jokes around and plays around with Dogecoin and he says this and he says that, you watch what his actions are saying, and his actions are reflecting what the actions of a lot of other smart people around the world are doing. And that's buying Bitcoin, because when you do the work, you come to the realization that Bitcoin's the solution to the biggest fucking problem. And I think the adoption over the coming year is going to be mind blowing. I think it's going to be very interesting. Like, I don't think this is just a normal 4-year bull market. Okay. Bitcoin goes through these 4-year bull markets. Every time after the Bitcoin halving, it has a run up. Okay. For anybody who's seen this on YouTube, I've just pulled up a chart and I've just essentially highlighted the Bitcoin halving in 2012, in 2016, and 2020. Every single time the Bitcoin supply that comes onto the network gets cut in half, you have a little bit of a bull market or a run up in price. So if I actually share that,
it's not really that little.
Yeah, no, it's never a little run up. I think, what was it, in 2012, Bitcoin ran from like 10 cents to $23. And after the 2016 halving, Bitcoin ran from $150 to $20,000 in 2 years. And now we've just had our 2020 halving and the bottom was at 3K. Most people are projecting that we're going to go for another normal 4-year cycle. And we're going to top out somewhere around 150 or, 300K. There's a model out there called stock to flow. A lot of people are putting a lot of precedence in stock to flow's prediction that Bitcoin's going to hit 288K by the end of 2021, maybe early 2022. I think the institutional adoption into Bitcoin has the potential to make Bitcoin go through something like a super cycle where it doesn't stop at 300K. Maybe it goes to 400, 500, 600, 700K. Yeah. What happens when all these money managers and pension funds start allocating 5 or 10% of their treasury reserves into Bitcoin? Apple has $200 billion worth of cash on its balance sheet. What happens if it wants to even allocate 10% of that to Bitcoin? It doesn't have to do a Michael Saylor and put 100% of its balance sheet in Bitcoin. But what happens when Michael Saylor's only got $4 billion worth of Bitcoin? If Apple wants to put 10% of their money into Bitcoin, that's 20 billion. That has the potential to have a massive impact on the price. And I think now that you've got these nation states, institutions, pension funds all allocated to Bitcoin, it all smells like a perfect storm for a super cycle for me, for Bitcoin. So
agreed. I absolutely agree. And I think what we've seen in the last, especially middle of this year, with the amount of FUD, the mining stuff and everything, but how quick the solutions were implemented. Like, all right, there's just these mining farms and everything just popping up in the US straight away. Like that was all a joke. Even the arguments around the mining and the environment and everything, what a crock of shit that was. But they really tried hard to push it down, and look at its recovery from that. It's been solid. It's been really, really solid. And you look at that, that's a great chart right there, because saying in trading and everything, like most people are caught in the day-to-day things with this. You zoom out, like you just zoom out and have a look at that. That is a strong, steady progression. And you, like what you say, the money that has come in now to Bitcoin, it's come from institutions. They've only been putting little percentages in, 1% here, 2% here. I remember BlackRock were looking at it, the biggest fund managers in the world.
Yeah.
They got 9 trillion on their balance sheet.
Yeah.
Something like that. 9 trillion.
Yeah. Yeah.
1%.
Yeah.
If they were to, they are already. They're one of these ones that announce we're looking at it. So they're making moves already. They're already doing it. The 1% of their $9 trillion.
Yeah.
Do the maths, people.
I
That sort of money doesn't come in and go out. It increases.
I couldn't agree more, mate. I think, so we talked about earlier, the 2.2 quadrillion dollars in the world. If you look at the money that's just in actual physical money, so fiat money, there's $100 trillion. There's $100 trillion bond market. There's $300 trillion worth of real estate out there. What percentage of real estate is a store of value? I think it's at least a third. So that's another $100 trillion parked in a defective store of value assets. These hedge fund managers control $270 trillion worth of wealth out there. What happens when 10% of that flows into Bitcoin? Let's say 10% of the $400 trillion that's parked in these store of value asset classes flows into Bitcoin. Well, again, we can go back and do some beautiful maths. 10% of 400 trillion is at $40 trillion. And if $40 trillion flows into Bitcoin, there's only 21 million coins in the total supply. But what's interesting is only 4 million coins are actually for sale. So for every dollar that flows into Bitcoin, you need to add a 3x multiplier. So if $40 trillion tries to come into the Bitcoin network, that's the equivalent of $120 trillion trying to flow into the Bitcoin network. So that instantly gives you a price point of Bitcoin of $60 million per coin. And that's if only 10% of that 400 trillion tries to flow into the Bitcoin network. So that's where we can start to get to some pretty crazy numbers and some pretty crazy figures. I love that you talked about BlackRock. Another massive asset manager is Fidelity. They've been in the Bitcoin space since 2015, 2016, and they actually come out with a recent report only last week. And it was like a 10 or a 15-page report that Fidelity wrote on Bitcoin specifically. And they pulled up the stock to flow and all of these Bitcoin charts. And they said, you know what? In 2035, we actually think that Bitcoin is going to hit $100 million per coin. So that was the projection I was talking about earlier. So you have asset managers that have over $10 trillion worth of assets under management come out and validate this message that all of the hardcore Bitcoiners are saying about Bitcoin. I think that is really important for the big money coming into the space. They're looking at these asset managers like BlackRock and Fidelity coming out and saying, yeah, you know what, we're allocating the Bitcoin. And you've even got Fidelity saying, you know what, Bitcoin could be the next global reserve currency and hit $100 million by 2035. So I think that's really important for the space. And I just think adoption is only going to accelerate, because when these smaller countries start allocating to Bitcoin in a small way, what happens to Tesla and MicroStrategy with Michael Saylor? Because they've got Bitcoin, if Bitcoin goes to 100 or 200K, naturally their balance sheets have suddenly grown by 10x. Their market cap has grown by 10x. And now all of these other companies in the S&P 500 or the NASDAQ or are listed on any of these stock market exchanges, they're like, oh shit, maybe we need to buy some Bitcoin too. And it's just going to cause this massive competitive FOMO, not just at the corporation level, but also at the goddamn nation state level, at the country level. Yeah. What happens if Bitcoin goes to 100 or 200K and it's little Ukraine and Cuba and Panama and El Salvador has adopted Bitcoin? Suddenly, some of these larger countries are like, hang on a minute, we're going to be demonetized, or we're losing money if we don't adopt Bitcoin, because these smaller nations that we've historically had a lot of power over, they're suddenly getting a lot richer by adopting this Bitcoin thing. Maybe some of these larger countries, maybe some of their economists, maybe some of them are going to start reading reports done by Fidelity, and maybe they're going to start getting orange pilled on Bitcoin. And I just think the absolute flood of adoption we're about to see over the next year or maybe 2 years is going to be mind-blowing.
I think, and all the things that we've outlined in here, and there's more too, but it links into what Bitcoin is, like even the comparison to other cryptos, how can't change it and things like this. That is a more secure investment, and it is a more secure for anyone to come in. And these are big players. For everyone listening right now, that you could use what you just said as a metaphor. These other countries, the small countries are coming in now. El Salvador, these smaller ones, they're adding to it now. Supply demand comes in. They're feeling like, oh my God, the value's gone up by 10x these countries. Same as other companies and everything like that. That's why I love what Michael Saylor did by educating straight up, going, hey, I'm transparent.
Yeah,
I'm doing this. Here's what my strategy is. You can take it up if you want. He's literally going, he's going to be walking around the world in 3 or 4 years. He's going to say, I told you so, I told you so, I told you so. They're all going bust. Yeah. And he's like the ones that went along. But these countries come in and supply demand comes in. They're talking in billions, hundreds of billions and trillions of dollars. Think about this if you're listening to this now and you're like, I'm the little guy. I've had a shit of a life. I haven't got in front. You have an opportunity to be the El Salvador or a little country right now. You do. Buy it $100 worth, $1,000 worth, $2,000 worth. Go back to the maths that Luke was mentioning.
It is riskier right now to not own any Bitcoin than to own 100% Bitcoin.
That's by the maths. It's not by speculation.
If you hate Bitcoin, if you're a new person out there and if you hate Bitcoin, just do the math, okay? If you're wrong, okay, everybody needs to admit, hey, there's a probability I could be wrong. There's a probability that Bitcoin fails and goes to zero. I'm okay with that probability. But there's also a probability that the Bitcoin haters are wrong and Bitcoin succeeds. And we're watching the smartest people around the world start to validate that possibility of Bitcoin succeeding. Yeah. And if Bitcoin succeeds, and if you have no Bitcoin today, that's the most risky financial system you can have in your entire life, because all of your assets, whether it's a home, whether it's a superannuation fund, whether it's 10 or 20K sitting in the bank earning 1% yield per year, all of that money is going to be completely demonetized. And if we do transition onto a Bitcoin standard, you are missing out on the largest wealth changing and wealth creating opportunity of a lifetime. Every single dollar, $1 that you put into Bitcoin today, if Bitcoin succeeds, that $1 will be worth $2,000. If you put $1,000 into Bitcoin today, we can do some more crazy maths. You can go 1,000 times 2,000. My maths is a little crusty and I'm a little bit hungry, so my brain's not working. But I think $1,000 today put into Bitcoin, if Bitcoin succeeds, that's $2 million of today's dollars into the future. I'm pretty
sure that's right too.
Yeah, if Bitcoin succeeds. Okay, so you are afforded this amazing opportunity of adopting Bitcoin when it's at 1% global adoption, and only the very tip of the iceberg of the smartest people around the world are coming to the realization that Bitcoin is the next financial system. I think it was actually Mexico's third richest person came out a month or so ago, and he said, hey, look, fiat money is a scam. I'm buying Bitcoin. And I think he said like 10% of his net worth was in Bitcoin. So it's literally everybody adopting Bitcoin. I think Joe Biden's president advisor has like something like $5 million worth of Bitcoin. So if
that's why I laugh. I laugh when anything comes out of there, but I laugh when someone like that, he's surrounded by people who are into crypto and are loaded. It's fascinating, but it's I think with the world stuff and all of that and how it's relative, so we don't dive too much into that. I think any of these big players, they're all big players, be they in the political scene, be it in the business scene, be it in the influencer scene. They all make a difference on our market sentiment. But the best way, like the way we feel about it, like the way we feel about Bitcoin and that, the best way to ground yourself going forward, no matter what they talk about, be it positive or negative, is take the risk and fucking get some skin in the game.
Yeah.
Because when you get some skin in the game, be it positive or negative news, it doesn't matter. The biggest risk you can take is like what Luke was saying, is to not have some right now. Because if this goes ahead and it succeeds, like, how are you going to feel if you just wait it out because so-and-so said this or so-and-so said that? I'm going to wait on this announcement. Or, oh, I don't know about it yet. Was that such a big deal? Most people are waiting to act. And I just encourage everyone to like really act now on this. And fuck, what's a dollar?
That's yeah. What's a dollar? Could be worth 2,000. But that's why I came to Bitcoin, because at first I was skeptical. I heard all of these FUD stories that the mainstream media were pushing. Okay, the mainstream media. There's actually a website that tracks all of the times the mainstream media has announced Bitcoin dead. It's completely dead. It's never coming back. It's called Bitcoin Obituaries. And on over 400 occasions, the mainstream media has announced Bitcoin dead. It's the tulip bubble. It's all over. The Chinese are going to ban mining. I know you brought that up earlier and I forgot to mention it. That has been one of the largest attack vectors for Bitcoin in its history. A lot of people have pointed to the mining concentration in China, and they said, hey, look, 50 to 60% of the mining is in China. If governments want to fight it, the Chinese government could nationalize all those miners and try to execute a 51% attack on Bitcoin. Well, they didn't. The Chinese government failed, and they said, you know what, we're going to ban mining in the country. So this is actually what caused the most recent crash in Bitcoin. We dropped from about 85 Australian dollars down to about 40,000 Australian dollars, about of a 55% crash. And the Bitcoin network has bounced straight back. All of those miners a lot of them have been shipped in overseas to places like Kazakhstan, North America, and Canada, and they're getting plugged into locations that are using more renewable energy. So that's actually why Elon Musk had to change his stance on Bitcoin, because 60% of the mining power was coming from China. And a lot of the mining power and a lot of the energy that the Bitcoin users, the Bitcoin miners use in China comes from like these dirty coal plants. A lot of it does come from these hydroelectric, a lot of it comes from these hydroelectric dams that they have in China. But a lot of the Bitcoin miners were plugging into the dirty fossil fuel sources. So that's why Elon was saying, hey, look, Bitcoin needs to be a little bit cleaner. Some of the energy that the miners needs to come from renewable sources. So after China banned Bitcoin, you had the massive crash, and all of the miners are getting plugged into places like Kazakhstan or in North America or in Canada that uses more renewable sources of energy. And that's when Elon had to came out at that conference that was called the B Word Conference. And he had that debate or that sit down and talk with, I think it was Jack and Cathie Wood, and he had to change his stance on Bitcoin. He said, hey, look, it's over 50% of the energy is now coming from renewable sources. I'm giving it the green light, which is bullshit anyway. But
it's incentivized. My understanding is the miners are incentivized because with each fork, they're incentivized. They have to improve their gear. So they have to make money out of it. So they want to go more energy efficient. So they have to go renewables and all these things that are incentivized. They're incentivized to do that. So any of them numbers that were thrown around, even the announcement by Elon, I just laughed at it.
Yeah.
I'm like,
yeah,
I'm pretty sure it's already 70% or something already.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah, Bitcoin miners, it's a beautiful thing. And this is actually, if anybody's looked into the Kardashev scale, so like a type 1 civilization, a type 2 civilization, and a type 3 civilization, Bitcoin, being energy money, is actually the thing that can take us to being a type 1 civilization where we're able to harness and use all of the energy that is present with us in the earth. So Bitcoin, the miners are incentivized to find the cheapest form of electricity because they're most profitable by mining the Bitcoin when they get the block rewards. That's why you see Bitcoin miners plug into electric sources next to hydroelectric dams where they've overbuilt a lot of the capacity there, and they're giving away electricity or energy for free. Or that's why you see Bitcoin miners go all the way out into the desert in the United States, and they plug into the back of these oil operations. So naturally, when you're mining for oil or you're fracking for oil, a byproduct is natural gas. And normally these people have to pay money or have to pay carbon credits to flare that natural gas into the atmosphere. They can't transport the energy or the electricity to the main electrical grid. So they have to actually flare that gas or it's wasted, and it's harmful for the environment. And they also have to pay a small fee for it. But the Bitcoin miners, what they're doing, there's a dude called Marty Bent, holds a great podcast called Tales from the Crypt, also runs a Bitcoin mining company called Great American Mining. He goes out to all of these off-grid mining operations and says to the oil rig people, hey, instead of wasting all this energy and electricity, do you mind if we plug in Bitcoin miners to your operation, and we're going to make you more profitable, and it's actually good for the environment? So that's a little bit on the Bitcoin mining. I wasn't sure.
I love that. No, this is good because it ties into what I'm talking about. What's changing the world now, and it goes into the wild man revolution. It's like these revolutionaries, and it's not just men, it's women as well, but they're entrepreneurs. They're looking for solutions. Whenever there's a problem come up, someone's like that. And that what you shared there is a brilliant example of that. Here's oil, here's something and fracking and that's in its own essence, it's probably not good for the environment, so many elements, but these Bitcoin miners, the way they think, people in this space, they are solution focused. And if it's incentivized by, like, they want to make more profit or they want it to be so it's not costing them to mine it. What's the point of mining it? They're looking for ways where they can
they're looking for, I know, I'm the same. We've been going for ages and I'm a little bit tongue-tied, but they're looking for ways to be more profitable and not waste energy and not...
Exactly.
If they can't get the energy to the grid, it normally just gets burned and wasted. And the Bitcoin miners, being some of the smartest people they are, they're solution-focused people. They say, there's a problem, we're going to get out there and we're going to fix that with a solution. And it's a win-win. There's
so many wins with this.
Yeah.
Again, if you've listened this far, well done, because we've covered lots of different angles and everything, and there's a lot more to this. But if you really have tuned in, I feel that you're going to get an understanding of why Bitcoin is not, so many people see it as just a new currency or digital money. There is so much more to this than even probably you'll probably find more as you dive into your research. And I know I've learned a lot from just today. Like there's things that I'm like, yeah, I get that. And there's other things like, yeah, fuck, that makes so much more sense now. Like even going into, we've touched on inflation and the old monetary system, but even going forward, if you bring that into the equation going forward, there's so many more things that can impact, the price or the value of Bitcoin, but how we operate and function on this planet. The civilization thing, that's an interesting thing. You'll have to send me, where do I find the rating?
I'll send you a video on the Kardashev scale, but
I
essentially,
like
Bitcoin mining enables us to move up to a type 1 civilization. I'm not 100% on exactly how it works, but essentially you're harnessing or you're not wasting any of the energy that's produced on the planet. And then obviously there's like a type 2 civilization. So from memory, you have to forgive me if I get this wrong, anybody listening. I think you're harnessing the energy in your solar system or from the stars around you. You're able to harness it and use it. So it's potentially a very, very revolutionary thing that Bitcoin does. And a lot of people just thinks it's just another stock on the screen. They think it's just another cryptocurrency. They think it's just another thing that's very volatile when it goes up and down in price. They get very scared from the short-term volatility. So Bitcoin goes up 20K. And then a little 10K drop scares them off. And they're like, it's new, it's foreign, I don't understand it. But you've got to understand. People were saying the same thing in the 1980s about the internet. They were saying, it's new, I don't understand it. But they could have profited immensely by adopting that new technology.
And what do people say now? Wish I was a part of the internet thing. Or they use stories to say, this is where this guy made his success.
Yeah.
When it's the same right now.
The richest,
I reckon. Yeah, go.
I was just going to quickly say the richest people in the world were the ones who profited off the internet boom. Look at Jeff Bezos with Amazon. Look at Tim Cook. Look at all of the largest companies around the world. What are the largest companies? Amazon, Apple, Microsoft, Google. They all profited off the internet boom. The next billionaires or the next richest people looking forward 20 years will be people who profited off the Bitcoin boom. It is the next evolution in money. It is the thing that for the first time in human history separates money from state, okay?
Yeah.
It is the thing that enables civilization to transition from an inflationary monetary system to a deflationary monetary system where your savings aren't debased by governments, where your savings actually appreciate in purchasing power. It's a big thing, but you go what you're gonna.
I don't know. I think that's a great way to conclude, because we could seriously dive into this and keep pulling apart all the angles and everything like that. I do have another question. I told you I only have one question for you before the thing,
Yeah.
but this is more of a what you've been talking about is absolutely probably at the center of this right now. But take yourself out now to the end of your lifetime. And you've lived out whatever your mission was, your purpose was. Big part of it is this here now. But what have you seen has been your legacy on the planet?
Me myself, what I want to achieve?
What you have. Take yourself out and what you have.
Yeah, I guess most humans want to help other humans, and I guess that's my goal as well. As corny as it sounds, I'm pretty.
That's why I'm in.
Yeah,
it's not
brother.
Corny at all.
Yeah, like that's why I'm here trying to educate others. Like I've got a really small YouTube channel. I just do videos breaking down all of the stuff we've been talking about with finance and money that we spent a lot of time on at the start of the podcast, but it's complicated and we're not taught about it in school for a very good reason. And it pisses me off when you take the red pill and you step out of the matrix and you see it for what it is. I love that movie, by the way, because seeing Bitcoin and understanding Bitcoin is like taking the red pill. Once you see the world the way it is, you can never go back. So that's my goal, is to probably try and transition and help as many people in like understand Bitcoin, learn about Bitcoin as I can, because I can see it's going to be the biggest thing, not just in our lifetimes, but it's potentially going to be the most revolutionary and transformative thing in human history. Okay, it's going to be such a big change. It's confusing at first. It's crazy and it's really hard to understand. So that's what I'm trying to do. Just help people understand Bitcoin. I mean, I've been thinking about Bitcoin 16 hours a day, every single day for the past 4 years. And like you said before, I'm still learning more about it. I still don't get more things about it. I spend a lot of my day on these Twitter spaces, just trying to learn more from Bitcoiners who are far more smart than me in the space. So that's what I'm trying to do, I suppose, just trying to pass it on. It's a complicated topic. It angers me that they don't teach us about money in school. So I thought, hey, why not try and help the everyday person learn more?
Yeah, maybe there's a schooling option for you down the track where you're just educating people on the new financial system once it's already in place.
Maybe. I don't know. I'm just a 23-year-old bogan. I'm not much of a teacher.
Oh, mate, for a bogan of that age, man, you know a lot and you've added massive, massive value on this. I've got a lot from this. It's yeah, I've been taking some notes from some of the things you shared, because I'm going to be diving down a few other rabbit holes myself. But for the listener and the viewer out there, I'm sure you could agree it has been an absolute wealth of knowledge. You're well wise beyond your years, man. You're doing great things. Like I say, if you can inspire a 43-year-old like me who's been into all the shit coins and everything like that to become more of a Bitcoin maxi, I think there's more than hope for everyone out there listening to you now. And I really encourage people to check out your channel. What's your channels?
Firstly, very kind words. I would have never guessed you were 43 as well, mate. You look just as young as me. It's unbelievable.
That's good.
I think my YouTube channel is called Fix the Money, Fix the World. I couldn't use my own name because, as we discussed at the start of the podcast, it's a pain in the ass to spell. So my podcast, that's on YouTube. Fix the Money, Fix the World. Follow me on Twitter. I'm going to publish a lot of articles. In particular, by the time this goes out, I would have dropped a few articles talking about the long-term debt cycle, the 250-year revolutionary cycle, the 90-year fourth turning cycle, and obviously all about Bitcoin. So I'm in these Twitter spaces. They're like live calls on Twitter and anybody can join. So we have rooms with hundreds of people in there at sometimes. So if you want to hear me ramble and rant about Bitcoin and economics for hours on end, you'll find me in those Twitter spaces. So I'll shoot my Twitter handle over to Steve so he can pop it in the Steve into the show notes. But it's Luke Mikic 21. So
awesome.
I've
Awesome,
loved this chat though, brother. I mean, thank you so much.
We're going to do this again, and I'm sure I'll get plenty of requests from it. I might even share some snippets to a lot of my tribe and everything like that. And like I say, I was super excited about this, and I can see why now. Thank you again. And guys, please connect in with Luke and what he's doing. I think what he offers the world is actually going to evolve after this chat. Now that we've been on here, I'll probably push him to do a few extra things other than hang out in Twitter chat rooms, but it's still important. And this has been the next edition of the Wild Man Revolution. And thank you for bringing your wild man, mate. It's been seriously wild and revolutionary.
No, I've appreciated, brother. I love it. I love it. And Bitcoin is the next revolution. We had the separation of church and state in the 16th century. Bitcoin is the separation of money and state in the 21st century. So it's been a pleasure to be on the Wild Man Revolution podcast. I've absolutely loved it. And I look forward to the Bitcoin revolution.
Thanks, brother.
See you guys.